The Millionaire'S 5 quintuplets hadn't slept for a whole week, turning the mansion into a scene of chaos and despair. But everything changes when a young, humble nanny enters the nursery and does something surprising that silences the cries of all 5 at once. This miraculous moment triggers an emotional dispute that reveals secrets, awakens suspicion, and threatens the fragile balance of the family. Now the millionaire will have to decide whether to trust the woman who brought peace to his girls or risk losing the only person capable of calming them. The crying echoed off the marble walls like a discordant symphony of despair. Richard Davenport pressed the palms of his hands against his eyes, trying to block out the sound that had been piercing his skull for 7 consecutive days. 7 days of not sleeping for more than 20 minutes at a time. 7 days of a nightmare that seemed to have no end. The mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, which once represented the success of his 35 years of hard work building a real estate empire, had transformed into a luxurious prison of glass and steel. The spacious rooms, the infinity pool overlooking the garden, the imported crystal, chandeliers. None of it mattered when 5 4-month-old babies cried in unison, pausing only to breathe and start again with renewed force. Richard descended the marble staircase, holding onto the banister, his legs weak with exhaustion. He passed through the living room decorated with contemporary art that Eleanor had chosen so carefully. Eleanor. His wife's name echoed in his mind like a wound that would never heal. 6 months. It had only been 6 months since she was gone. The crying intensified as he approached the nursery. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper who had worked in the house for 10 years, was in the hallway with red eyes and an expression of someone who had reached the limit of human endurance. Eleanor, Hannah, Lily, Sophie, and Bella. 5 identical girls who came into the world in an emergency delivery that lasted 8 hours. 5 miracles that cost the highest price Richard had ever imagined paying. The medical team said they did everything possible, that complications in quintuplet births were expected, that no one could have predicted it. But none of that eased the emptiness that consumed Richard from within. He entered the nursery, and visual chaos joined the auditory chaos. Mrs. Potts, the 6th nanny in a month, was trying to rock 2 babies at once while the other 3 writhed in their cribs, their little faces red from crying. The 50-year-old woman with decades of experience and impeccable references had tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Davenport, I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice trembling. "I've tried everything, every technique I've learned in 30 years of my profession. They just don't stop. It's as if they're in constant suffering." It wasn't the first time Richard had heard this. The first nanny lasted 3 days, the second 5. The third quit after a single night. The others hadn't made it a full week, all experienced, all well-recommended, all defeated by the same invisible enemy. Richard picked up Eleanor, the oldest by 3 minutes, and tried to soothe her. She struggled in his arms, her crying escalating. He felt the baby's hot tears wet his linen shirt. He tried singing, tried rocking, tried murmuring words of comfort. Nothing worked. Little Eleanor screamed as if she were calling for someone who would never come back. "Dr. Anderson was clear," Mrs. Gable said from the doorway. "The girls are healthy. The tests show there's nothing physically wrong. But he said something else too, remember? He said they feel it. They feel the loss. They feel the sadness that has taken over this house." Richard looked at the housekeeper. Mrs. Gable had helped Eleanor decorate the nursery. Soft pink walls, 5 white cribs lined up side by side, colorful mobiles hanging from the ceiling. Eleanor had planned every detail with love in the last months of her pregnancy, when she could barely move from carrying 5 lives inside her. She would have known what to do, Richard murmured, more to himself than to the others in the room. Mrs. Potts placed the 2 babies she was holding back in their cribs and took a deep breath. "Mr. Davenport, with all due respect, I need to be honest. This isn't a matter of technique or experience. These girls need something I can't give. They need genuine maternal love, not professionalism. I'm so sorry, but I can't continue to see them like this." Before Richard could respond, the nanny was already leaving the room. He heard her quick steps descending the stairs, heard the front door close. Another one giving up. Another one confirming his greatest fear, that he wouldn't be able to care for the 5 girls Eleanor had left behind on his own. Mrs. Gable entered the nursery and began to pick up the babies one by one, checking diapers, adjusting clothes. "I'll call the agency again," she said wearily. "There must be someone somewhere who knows how to handle this situation." Richard left the room because he could no longer bear to see his daughter's despair and be unable to do anything to relieve it. He went down to his office, closed the thick glass door that partially muffled the sound, and threw himself into the leather armchair. Through the window he saw the perfectly manicured lawn, the royal palms Eleanor had insisted on planting, the ornamental fountain where they had taken their last photo together, with her belly enormous and a radiant smile on her face. The phone rang. It was Mark, his partner at the construction firm. "Richard, I need you here. We have a meeting with the Japanese investors in 2 hours. They want to close the deal for the mall in Stamford." "I can't, Mark. The situation here is unbearable." On the other end of the line he heard a sigh of impatience. "Richard, I understand it's difficult, but you need to get back to work. It's been over a month since you've been to the office. Projects are stalled. People are asking questions." "Then let them ask," Richard replied sharply. "I have 5 babies who haven't stopped crying for a week. They don't sleep, they barely eat, they're losing weight. 7 doctors have been here, and none can explain what's happening. Do you think I can think about shopping malls right now?" After hanging up, Richard stared at his own hands, hands that had built buildings, signed multi-million-dollar contracts, shaken the hands of important businessmen. But they couldn't hold 5 babies and make the crying stop. He felt like the most useless man in the world. 3 hours later, it was already night. The crying continued. Richard went back up to the nursery where Mrs. Gable had taken over the shift alone after Mrs. Potts left. The housekeeper was exhausted, barely able to keep her eyes open. "Go rest," he said. "I'll stay with them tonight." "Mr. Davenport, you need to sleep too. It's been a week." "I can handle it. Go." After she left, Richard was alone with his 5 daughters. He picked up Hannah and held her against his chest, feeling her tiny body tremble with each sob. Then he picked up Lily with his other arm. Both continued to cry, but he didn't give up. He sat in the nursing chair that Eleanor never got to use and stayed there, rocking gently, trying to transmit some comfort to these 2 little creatures who depended completely on him. Sophie, Bella, and Eleanor remained in their cribs, the cries of each one mingling with the others. Richard looked up at the ceiling and felt the weight of responsibility crush his chest. How was he going to do this alone? How was he going to care for 5 babies when he couldn't even get them to stop crying? Dawn arrived, and the crying did not cease. Richard tried to give bottles to all 5, one by one. 2 accepted a few milliliters. The other 3 refused completely. He changed diapers, checked temperatures, sang songs he made up on the spot because he didn't know any real ones. Nothing worked. When the sun rose through the nursery curtains, Richard was leaning against the wall with Hannah finally asleep, in his lap. But it was a sleep that lasted only 20 minutes. As soon as he tried to put her back in the crib, she woke up screaming again, waking the others who had dozed off briefly. Mrs. Gable found Richard in the nursery at 7 in the morning, his eyes red and his expression lost. She said nothing, just silently took command, while he staggered to his own room and collapsed on the bed, too weak to even take off his shoes. He slept for 2 hours before being awakened by the phone. It was the nanny agency. "We have one last candidate available," the attendant said. "She's younger than the others, 25, but her references are good. Can I send her over this afternoon for an interview?" Richard accepted without hope. Another one who wouldn't last, another one who would give up upon seeing the chaos the mansion had become. But he had no choice. He desperately needed help, and this was the last option left before considering something more drastic, like a rotating team of nurses, or even hospitalizing the babies for observation. At noon, the crying of the 5 continued. Richard took a quick shower, changed his clothes, and tried to look minimally presentable to receive the new candidate. But he knew he couldn't hide the deep, dark circles under his eyes, the weight he'd lost in recent days, the desperation that showed in every movement. The doorbell rang at 3 in the afternoon. Richard went down to answer, mentally preparing his warning speech about the extreme working conditions. He opened the door and found a young woman in simple but clean clothes, faded jeans and a white cotton blouse. She had brown hair tied in a ponytail, no makeup, and eyes that immediately caught Richard's attention, eyes that seemed to carry stories, that had something melancholic but also determined about them. "Good afternoon," she said in a soft voice. "My name is Emily Carter. I'm here about the nanny position." Richard invited her in, and immediately the crying echoed through the mansion like a warning. Emily's expression didn't change. She showed no shock or discomfort. She just tilted her head slightly, as if listening to a familiar melody. "They're quintuplets," Richard said, deciding to be direct. 4 months old, they haven't slept for a whole week. 6 nannies have already quit. The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong with them. If you want to back out now, I completely understand. Emily looked up the stairs, in the direction the crying was coming from. "May I see them?" she asked simply. Richard led her to the nursery, where Mrs. Gable was once again trying to calm all 5 babies simultaneously. A humanly impossible task. The housekeeper looked at the new candidate with a mixture of hope and skepticism. She had seen others come and go, but what happened next left everyone paralyzed. Emily entered the nursery, approached the cribs, and did something none of the other nannies had done. She picked up Eleanor, Hannah, and Lily at the same time, positioning them strategically against her slender body, and bent down so that Sophie and Bella, still in their cribs, could touch her legs. Then she began to murmur something softly, words Richard couldn't distinguish, but that had a specific cadence, a rhythm that seemed to come from some ancient, forgotten place. And for the first time in 7 days of hell, the 5 babies stopped crying at the same time. The silence that filled the nursery was as impactful as the crying had been for the past 7 days. Richard stood frozen in the doorway, unable to process what he was seeing. Mrs. Gable dropped the bottle she was holding and covered her mouth with her hands, her eyes wide. Emily continued to hold 3 babies against her body while the other 2 touched her legs, and she murmured something that sounded like an ancient song with no defined melody, just a gentle rhythm that seemed to lull not only the girls, but the very air around them. Eleanor, Hannah, and Lily were quiet in her arms, their wide eyes fixed on the young woman's face as if they had found something they had been looking for a long time. "How did you do that?" Richard finally managed to speak, his voice hoarse with emotion. Emily looked at him over the babies' heads. "Quintuplets have a different bond than regular twins, sir. They spent 9 months extremely cramped in the womb, intertwined with each other. They aren't just sisters. They are part of one another. When one cries, the others feel it and cry too. It's not just imitation. It's a deep emotional connection." She moved slowly, picking up Sophie and Bella from their cribs and sitting in the nursing chair with all 5 arranged so that they could all touch some part of her body. 2 on her lap, 2 resting on her thighs, 1 leaning against her arm. It was a position that seemed impossible to maintain, but Emily made it look natural. "The doctors didn't say anything about that," Richard said, approaching carefully as if any sudden movement could break the spell. "Doctors see physical symptoms, Mr. Davenport. I see what's beyond. These girls lost their mother. They know even without consciously understanding. In the first months of life, babies recognize their mother's scent, voice, heartbeat. All of that suddenly disappeared. And more than that, they feel the sadness that has taken over this house. They feel that their father is broken inside." Emily's words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He staggered slightly and leaned on the nearest crib. Mrs. Gable approached him, her hand on his arm in a gesture of support. Emily continued, her voice soft but firm. The other nannies came with professional techniques, strict routines, tested methods. But what these 5 need isn't professionalism, sir. They need genuine maternal love. They need to feel that someone loves them not because they're paid to, but because they truly care. They need a heart that beats for them. Richard sat on the edge of Eleanor's empty crib, his legs weak. "And you can give them that?" Emily looked at the 5 babies in her arms, and Richard saw something in her eyes that made him realize there was much more to this young woman than met the eye. "I can try, Mr. Davenport. I can try with everything I have." Mrs. Gable wiped away the tears streaming down her face. It was the first time in days Richard had seen hope on the housekeeper's face. "Miss Carter, would you like some coffee? You must be tired from your journey." "Not yet, thank you. I need to establish trust with the girls first. Could you bring me their bottles? I think they'll take food now. And they did. As Emily fed each one, they sucked eagerly for the first time in days. Eleanor drank almost 100 milliliters. Hannah, 80. Lily, 90. Sophie and Bella, a little less, but still much more than they had taken in recent days. After feeding, Emily changed their diapers one by one, talking softly to each baby, calling them by their names, carefully observing each one's reactions. It's important to recognize that they are 5 different people, she said as she adjusted Sophie's clothes. They may be physically identical, but they already have unique personalities. Eleanor is more serious. She observes everything before reacting. Hannah is curious. She gets restless when she doesn't understand something. Lily is sensitive. She feels first and thinks later. Sophie is determined. When she wants something, she doesn't give up. And Bella is gentle. Even at 4 months, she already shows concern for her sisters. Richard was impressed. She had spent less than an hour with the girls and already had these insights. The other nannies had treated the 5 as a unit, a task multiplied by 5, not as distinct individuals. When the clock struck 6 in the evening, Emily asked about the sleep routine. Richard explained that there was no routine, that the babies napped irregularly for 20 or 30 minutes and then woke up crying again. "We need to change that tonight," Emily said with determination. "They are exhausted, you are exhausted, the whole house is exhausted. I'm going to need everyone to keep the environment calm and quiet after 8 o'clock. No loud conversations, television, music. The babies need to understand that it's time to sleep." Richard agreed immediately. He would do anything for his daughters to sleep. Mrs. Gable prepared a light dinner, but Richard could barely eat, anxious and nervous about the night ahead. Emily ate quickly in the kitchen, thanked her, and returned to the nursery where the 5 were beginning to get restless again. 8:30 at night. The babies had been fed, changed, and were clean and comfortable. Emily began the ritual. She placed 3 in cribs close to each other, took 2 in her arms, and sat in the chair. Then she began to sing. It wasn't a well-known song, but something old, in a lullaby rhythm that seemed to come from forgotten times. "Sleep, my love, sleep in peace. The night has come, and the day is gone," she sang softly, her version gentle and soothing. "Sleep soundly in your little bed, for Mummy is here right by your head." Richard was at the nursery door watching. The word "Mommy" instead of "Daddy" in the song made his chest tighten, but he swallowed the lump in his throat and continued to watch. Emily rocked the 2 babies while extending a hand to touch the other 3 in their cribs. Her arms must have been aching, but she showed no sign of it. She continued to sing softly, her voice becoming increasingly gentle, almost a whisper. 40 minutes later, Eleanor closed her little eyes. Then Hannah. Lily resisted a bit longer, but eventually gave in. Sophie was the penultimate. Bella, the last, as if she didn't want to miss a moment of this new feeling of security. When they were all asleep, Emily waited another 15 minutes before moving. Then, with the care of someone handling Crystal, she placed the 2 she was holding into their cribs. She adjusted each one, making sure they were comfortable, covered them with light blankets, and left the room in silent steps. In the hallway, Richard was waiting for her. "They're sleeping," he said, incredulous. "Really sleeping?" Emily nodded, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "But they'll wake up in a few hours. 4-month-old babies still need to feed during the night. The important thing is to establish a pattern. Every night, same routine, same song, same feeling of security. In a few days, they'll understand that nighttime is for sleeping." Richard looked at the young woman he barely knew, but who had already done more for his daughters in hours than everyone else had in days. "Where did you learn all this?" Emily averted her gaze, something dark passing over her face. "From life, Mr. Davenport. Sometimes we learn the most important lessons in the most painful ways." Before Richard could ask more, she excused herself to rest a little in the room Mrs. Gable had prepared for her, one of the staff rooms on the ground floor, simple but comfortable. Richard remained in the hallway, listening to the silence coming from the nursery as if it were a symphony. 11 o'clock at night. A cry began. Richard rushed out of his room, but Emily was already in the nursery, picking up Hannah, who had woken up. The young nanny fed her quickly, changed her diaper, and before the others could wake up, she had put Hannah back to sleep. 2 in the morning. This time, 3 woke up together. Emily repeated the process with infinite patience, feeding, changing, soothing. 5 in the morning, another round. But she always managed to get them all back to sleep. When the sun rose at 6:30, all 5 were still sleeping. Richard, who had spent the whole night awake watching from a distance, felt tears stream down his face. It was the first night in 7 days that his daughters had slept for more than 30 minutes at a time. Each had slept for at least 4 hours in total, in intermittent periods. Emily came out of the nursery at 7 in the morning and found Richard in the hallway, his eyes red with tears. "Thank you," he said simply. "Thank you for giving them a night of peace." Emily smiled tiredly. "It was just the first one, Mr. Davenport. There's still a lot of work ahead, but they will get better. I promise they will." Mrs. Gable prepared a hearty breakfast and insisted that Emily eat well. The young woman accepted, admitting she was famished. During the meal, Richard asked about her previous experience, training, references. Emily answered honestly that she had no formal training in pedagogy or nursing, just 5 years of practical experience caring for babies and young children in various families. "Why did you leave your previous jobs?" Richard asked. Emily hesitated before answering. "Sometimes the families moved away. Other times the children grew up and no longer needed a full-time nanny. Once it was because the mother wanted to take care of her child herself, which is understandable." There was something unsaid in that answer, Richard realized, but he decided not to press. What mattered was that she was achieving the impossible with his daughters. The following days confirmed the miracle. On the second night, the 5 slept from 11 at night until 5 in the morning, with only 2 brief awakenings. On the third night, they slept from 10 to 6 with just 1 awakening. On the fourth night, Eleanor, Sophie and Bella slept for 7 hours straight, an absolute record. But it wasn't just the sleep. The babies started to smile. First Hannah, who gave her first laugh when Emily made a funny face, then Lily, who smiled upon hearing the nanny's voice. Eleanor watched everything seriously before finally giving in and smiling too. Sophie and Bella followed, each in her own time. Richard observed everything with a mixture of gratitude and pain. Gratitude because his daughters were finally well. Pain because Eleanor wasn't there to see it. She had dreamed so much of this moment, imagined so much their first laughs, their first looks of recognition, their first signs of personality. Emily noticed his sadness. One afternoon, while the babies were napping after lunch, she found him in the office looking at a photo. It was of the last ultrasound, 5 small silhouettes huddled together, and Eleanor beside it with her hand on her enormous belly and eyes shining with happiness. "She would be happy to see how they are now," Emily said softly. Richard turned, not having noticed her presence. "How do you know?" "Because mothers want their children to be happy above all else, and your daughters are starting to be happy again. That's what matters." Richard nodded, putting the photo in the drawer. "Thank you, Emily, for everything. You saved my daughters. You saved me too, in a way." Emily smiled sadly. "They saved me, sir. You have no idea how much." 3 weeks had passed since Emily arrived at the Greenwich mansion, and the transformation was visible in every corner of the house. The nursery that once echoed with constant crying now resonated with curious babbling and occasional giggles. The 5 babies gained weight. Their cheeks became chubbier, their eyes brighter. Richard returned to work, first part-time, then gradually resuming his full routine. Mark celebrated his partner's return, saying that projects would finally get back on track. But even at the office, in the middle of important meetings, Richard found himself thinking about his daughters, wondering what they were doing. If Hannah had knocked down that colourful mobile again with her determined kicks, if Sophie had discovered she could hold her own little foot. Every night when he came home, Richard went straight up to the nursery, and he always found a scene that warmed his heart. Emily sitting on the floor surrounded by the 5, each baby at a different stage of developing motor coordination. Eleanor could already roll from her stomach to her back on her own. Hannah tried to reach for the toys Emily dangled above her. Lily watched her sisters attentively before imitating their movements. Sophie was determined to bring her own foot to her mouth, not giving up until she succeeded. Bella was always attentive to the others, as if checking if everyone was okay. Emily had created a specific routine for each of them, recognizing that although they were quintuplets, they were 5 unique individuals. Eleanor liked slower, more melodious music. Hannah preferred upbeat rhythms. Lily responded best to soft conversations. Sophie loved challenges, so Emily always presented toys slightly beyond her reach to stimulate her. Bella needed constant physical contact, so there was always a hand from Emily touching her while she cared for the others. Mrs. Gable was delighted. "I've never seen anything like it," she commented one morning while preparing coffee. "Those girls were wasting away, Mr. Davenport. Now look at them. They're healthy, happy. It's miraculous." Richard agreed, drinking his coffee and looking out the kitchen window at the garden Eleanor had loved so much. "Emily is special. I don't know how, but she understands these girls in a way that goes beyond technique or experience." The housekeeper hesitated before speaking. "May I offer an opinion, sir?" "Of course, Mrs. Gable." "That young woman has something in her past. I see it in her eyes. Sometimes, when she doesn't know I'm looking, she gets such a sad expression it breaks your heart. And there are times she hugs the girls with such intensity, as if she's holding on to something that could disappear at any moment." Richard had noticed that too, the way Emily looked at the babies when she thought no one was watching, the deep sadness that sometimes showed through, the dedication that went beyond professional. But he didn't feel it was his place to ask. Everyone had their private pains, and as long as it didn't affect the care of the girls, Emily's past was her own business. That evening, however, something changed. Richard arrived earlier than usual, around 6 in the evening. He went up to the nursery and stopped at the door upon hearing Emily talking to the babies. She was sitting in the nursing chair with the 5 settled around her in creative ways, and she spoke as if they could understand every word. "Do you know you're very lucky? You have a father who loves you more than anything in the world. You have a beautiful house, good food, clean clothes, toys, but more important than all that, you have each other. 5 sisters who will grow up together, share everything, always support each other. That's a treasure so great you can't even imagine it yet." Emily paused, her voice growing quieter. "I had a baby once, just for a moment, but it was enough to change everything. He never got to breathe the air of this world, but he breathed inside me for 8 months, and when he was gone, he took a piece of me that never came back." Richard felt the air leave his lungs. He remained motionless in the doorway, not knowing whether to enter or respect this private moment. "That's why I take care of you with so much love," Emily continued, wiping away tears that streamed down her face. "Every diaper I change, every bottle I give, every lullaby I sing is a tribute to my little boy I never knew. It's my way of saying that he mattered, that he existed, that his time inside me had meaning. Every baby I help grow strong and happy is a way of honoring his memory." Eleanor babbled something, and Emily smiled through her tears. "I know, little one. You don't understand a word I'm saying. But one day you'll grow up, and maybe you'll understand that love doesn't need blood ties. Genuine love is born from daily care, constant dedication, the will to see another happy even when you yourself are broken." Richard backed away silently, went down the stairs and into his office. He sat in the leather armchair and stared into space for long minutes, processing what he had heard. Emily had lost a child. Taking care of babies was her way of coping with that pain. Suddenly everything made sense. The absolute dedication, the love that seemed to go beyond professional, the sadness in her eyes when she thought no one was looking. He thought of Eleanor, of the void she had left, of the pain that never went away, and he thought of Emily carrying her own pain while caring for his daughters with so much love. There was a connection there, 2 broken souls trying to survive through the care of 5 little lives. An hour later, Emily came down with the babies for dinner. They were old enough to start trying light purees, and Emily had established a routine where she fed them all together, seated in high chairs arranged in a semicircle. Richard watched as she went from one to the other, offering spoonfuls, wiping mouths, praising each small achievement. "Can I help?" he offered. Emily smiled. "Of course, Mr. Davenport. Sophie is being particularly stubborn today, refusing anything green. Maybe she'll take it from her father." Richard took the bowl of spinach puree and sat in front of little Sophie, who observed him with critical eyes. "So, tough little lady, let's make a deal. You eat 3 spoonfuls and I'll eat 3 spoonfuls. Deal?" Sophie continued to stare at him without expression. Richard put a spoonful in his own mouth and made an exaggerated face of approval. Delicious. Now it's your turn." To everyone's surprise, Sophie opened her mouth and accepted the spoonful. Emily laughed, a genuine sound that Richard realized he didn't hear often. She has her father's stubborn streak, definitely. As they fed the babies together, Richard felt something strange. A sense of normalcy he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't complete happiness. The absence of Eleanor still hurt like an open wound. But it was a momentary peace, a respite in the midst of the storm of grief. "Emily," he began hesitantly, after the babies were put in their cribs for their post-dinner nap. "I know it's none of my business, but I want you to know that if you ever need to talk about anything, I'm here. I know we haven't known each other long, but you're part of this house now. You're part of the family." Emily looked at him surprised, and for a moment Richard feared he had crossed some invisible line between employer and employee. But then she nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Mr. Davenport. That means a lot. And please, call me Richard. Mr. Davenport makes me feel old." She smiled. "All right, Richard." In the following days, the relationship between them subtly changed. There was still the clear hierarchy of employer and employee, but there was also a mutual respect, a tacit understanding that both had suffered deep losses and were trying to move forward as best they could. Richard started coming home earlier from work, not just to see his daughters, but also to help. He learned how to bathe the babies, to change diapers quickly, to identify the different types of cries. Emily taught him with patience, never making him feel inadequate even when he made basic mistakes. One evening, while they were bathing the 5 in a complex logistical operation involving 2 baby tubs and a lot of coordination, Hannah splashed water in Richard's face. He laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised even himself. Emily looked at him and smiled. "It's good to hear you laugh." Richard wiped his face with a towel. "I had forgotten what it felt like." The girls have a way of bringing joy even in the most difficult moments. "Eleanor loved that," Richard said suddenly, surprising himself by talking about his wife. "She loved it when I laughed. Said my work made me too serious, too focused on numbers and contracts. She always tried to make me laugh with bad jokes." Emily said nothing, just continued to soap Lily carefully, giving him space to talk. "She got pregnant right after we got married," Richard continued. "It wasn't planned, but she was so happy. And when we found out it was 5, she panicked for a day and then decided it would be the greatest adventure of our lives. She started planning everything, reading all the books on multiples, decorating the nursery. She was so excited." His voice faltered. "The last few months were hard. She could barely move, had constant pain, didn't sleep well, but she never complained. She said it would all be worth it when she held the 5 of them in her arms, except she never got that chance." Emily stopped what she was doing and looked at Richard with genuine compassion. "She did get that chance, Richard. Maybe not in the way she planned, but she had them. For 9 months, she carried those 5 lives inside her, nourished them, protected them, loved them. They knew their mother in a way no one else ever will. They knew the rhythm of her heart, her voice from the inside, her love directly. No one can take that away." Richard felt the tears stream down and didn't try to hold them back. "Thank you for that, for reminding me that she was a part of their lives even if it was so brief. They will know about their mother," Emily promised. "When they grow up, they will hear stories about her, see photos, understand how much they were loved even before they were born. Their mother's love will always be a part of who they are." That night, after putting the 5 to sleep with the now established routine, Richard and Emily sat on the porch with tea, listening to the baby monitor. They sat in comfortable silence for a while each, lost in thought. "Have you ever thought about having more children?" Emily asked suddenly. Richard looked at her, surprised. "No. I mean, 5 is more than enough, and I can't imagine having children with anyone other than Eleanor." "I understand," Emily said softly. "It's hard to imagine starting over after losing someone so important." "Were you ever married?" Richard asked, realizing he knew very little about her personal life. Emily shook her head. "I dated my baby's father for 2 years. When I got pregnant, he was happy at first, but when the baby passed away in the 8th month, he couldn't handle it. He said it was too painful that he couldn't look at me without remembering. He broke up with me 3 months later." Richard felt anger towards this man he didn't know. "I'm sorry. You didn't deserve to go through that alone." "Life isn't about deserving or not deserving," Emily said with a wisdom that seemed to come from someone much older. "It's about how we deal with what happens to us. I chose to turn my pain into love for other children. It doesn't replace what I lost, but it gives my life purpose." They stayed on the porch for a while longer, sharing stories and silences, until the monitor indicated that Sophie was waking up. Emily got up to attend to her, but Richard went with her. Together they soothed the baby and got her back to sleep. As he left the nursery, Richard realized that for the first time since Eleanor had passed, he didn't feel completely alone. The phone rang on a Saturday morning, interrupting the quiet moment when Richard was watching Emily play with the girls on the activity mat in the living room. It was Mrs. Teresa, his mother, calling from JFK Airport. "I'm coming back, my son. I'll be there in 2 hours. I need to see my granddaughters and understand what's happening in that house." Richard felt his stomach tighten. His mother had traveled to Paris 3 months earlier, shortly after Eleanor's passing, saying she needed time to process the loss of her daughter-in-law and couldn't bear to see her son suffering. She had promised to return when she was emotionally stronger. But now, hearing the firm, controlling tone in her voice, Richard feared her return would cause more problems than solutions. Mrs. Teresa Davenport, at 62, was an imposing woman. The widow of a successful textile businessman for a decade, she maintained an aristocratic posture that intimidated most people. She dressed in discreet but expensive elegance, frequented the most refined social circles of New York, and had very definite opinions about how things should be, especially when it involved her family. When the luxury car pulled up in front of the mansion, Richard was waiting at the door. Mrs. Teresa stepped out, wearing large sunglasses, an impeccable travel suit, and 3 suitcases that the driver began to unload. She hugged her son briefly, assessing him with critical eyes. "You're thinner. And those dark circles? Aren't you sleeping?" "I'm sleeping better now, Mother. The girls have improved a lot." "So it's true. You hired a nanny who finally managed to calm the quintuplets. I want to meet her immediately." Richard led his mother inside. Emily was in the nursery with the 5 babies, who at now almost 6 months were beginning to sit up with support and showed increasingly distinct personalities. Hearing footsteps, Emily stood up politely, straightening the simple blouse she was wearing. "Mother, this is Emily Carter, the girls' nanny. Emily, my mother, Teresa Davenport." Emily extended her hand with a respectful smile. "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Davenport. The girls hear so much about their grandmother." Mrs. Teresa shook her hand briefly, her eyes scanning Emily from head to toe. "Here? 6-month-old babies don't talk, girl." "It's a figure of speech, I apologize. What I meant is that Mr. Davenport tells them stories about you." Mrs. Teresa didn't reply, already turning to the cribs where the 5 babies watched her with curiosity. She picked up Eleanor, the oldest, and lifted her carefully. "You look like your mother," she murmured in an emotional voice. "Every day I pray that she is at peace." The babies, used to Emily and Richard, were startled by the new presence. Eleanor started to fuss, and within seconds, Lily did too. Emily approached naturally, extending her arms. "May I? They're not used to her yet." Mrs. Teresa handed Eleanor over reluctantly, watching how the baby calmed down instantly in Emily's arms. The older woman's eyes narrowed slightly, an expression Richard knew well. It was the expression she made when something displeased her, but she was still assessing the situation. In the following days, the tension in the mansion gradually increased. Mrs. Teresa settled into one of the guest suites and began to observe Emily's every move. During the baby's mealtimes, she would be present, commenting on techniques she considered outdated or inadequate. When Emily put the girls to sleep, she would appear in the nursery with unsolicited suggestions. Emily, always polite, accepted the criticism without confrontation, but Richard could see the tension growing on the young nanny's face. Mrs. Gable also noticed, commenting discreetly that the house had lost the tranquility it had gained in recent weeks. One afternoon, Richard came home from work to find his mother in the office, her face serious. "We need to talk about this young woman." Richard sat down, already knowing what was coming. "About Emily. Mother, she saved the girls. When she got here, they were wasting away. Now look at them." "Yes, I see. And that worries me even more. The girls are excessively attached to her. Eleanor cries when she leaves the room. Hannah looks for her. This isn't healthy. They love Emily, Mother. And that's a good thing. They need love." "Love from a stranger we barely know?" Mrs. Teresa crossed her arms. "Do you have any idea who she really is? Where she came from?" "I had her investigated, Richard. I spoke with her previous employers." Richard felt his blood boil. "You did what?" "Someone has to think about the safety of these children." Mrs. Teresa opened a file she had on the desk. "And what I discovered is disturbing. In 3 of the previous families there were problems. Children who would cry at the sight of their own mothers and only calm down with her. A 2-year-old boy who called her Mommy instead of his biological mother. An employer who let her go because her son became inconsolable when she announced she was going on vacation." Richard was silent, processing the information. "That doesn't mean she did anything wrong. It means she's good at what she does, that she creates genuine bonds with children." "Excessive bonds," Mrs. Teresa corrected. "One of the former employers told me something else. Emily had confided years ago that she lost a baby in the 8th month of pregnancy. She was emotionally devastated. Since then, it seems she projects this loss onto every child she cares for." Richard stood up, walking to the window. "I know that, Mother. She told me." "She told you?" Mrs. Teresa seemed surprised. "And you don't see a problem with that? A woman who lost a child and now becomes excessively attached to the children of others?" "I see a woman who turned her pain into love for other children. I see someone who treats my daughters with genuine affection, not cold professionalism. The girls are healthy, happy, developing well. What else matters?" Mrs. Teresa stood up too, approaching her son. "What matters is the future. These girls will grow up. They will need to understand that Emily is an employee, not their mother. And the longer this goes on, the harder it will be to make that separation. You are allowing her to occupy a place that is not hers." "And what place is that?" Richard turned sharply. "Eleanor's place. No one will ever take her place, Mother, but the girls need someone who loves them as a mother would, and Emily does that." "For how long?" Mrs. Teresa crossed her arms. "Until she finds a husband and decides to leave. Until she has her own children and can no longer dedicate herself to yours. And then what happens? Will the girls suffer another traumatic separation?" Richard had no answer for that. The truth was, he had never thought about the long term. He was so focused on solving the present, on keeping his daughters healthy and happy, that he hadn't considered the future. "I'm bringing in a specialist," Mrs. Teresa said firmly. "Dr. Henry Wallace is a family friend, a respected pediatrician with a specialization in child development. I want him to examine the girls and give a professional opinion on this situation." 3 days later, Dr. Henry Wallace arrived at the mansion. He was a man in his early 50s with graying hair, elegant glasses, and an impeccable white coat. Mrs. Teresa greeted him like an old acquaintance, offering coffee and leading him to the nursery. Richard watched as the doctor examined each of the girls. He checked reflexes, motor development, emotional reactions. He asked Emily to step away and observed how the babies reacted. 4 of the 5 began to cry almost immediately. Only Eleanor, always more observant, remained quiet but visibly tense. Then he asked Emily to return. The change was instantaneous. The babies calmed down, smiled, reached their little arms out to her. Dr. Wallace jotted everything down in a small notebook, asking Emily questions about the routine, how she interacted with each baby and the methods she used. An hour later, he gathered Richard and Mrs. Teresa in the office. Emily was not invited to the meeting. The doctor took a deep breath before speaking, adjusting his glasses. "Well, I'll be direct. The babies are exhibiting what we call collective anxious attachment. It's rare in quintuplets, but not impossible. They have developed an excessive emotional dependence on a single figure, in this case Miss Carter. This could be problematic in the long run." "In what way?" Richard asked, his heart tightening. "Children need to develop internal emotional security, not external dependence. If they only feel safe in the presence of one specific person, it hinders the development of emotional autonomy. It can cause separation problems, anxiety, and difficulty forming healthy bonds with other people, including their own father." Richard felt like he'd been punched. "But they interact well with me. We play together. I help with their care." "Yes, but notice that when they are distressed, they seek out Miss Carter first. This indicates that she has become the primary attachment figure, which is not ideal considering she is an employee, not a permanent member of the family." Mrs. Teresa leaned forward. "Doctor, what is your recommendation?" The doctor hesitated. "Ideally, a gradual distancing would be necessary. Reduce the hours the nanny spends with the children, introduce other caregivers, strengthen the bond with the father. In extreme cases, it may be necessary to replace the nanny with someone who maintains a more appropriate professional distance." Richard felt the floor give way beneath him. "No, I'm not firing Emily. The girls are finally well, finally happy." "I understand your resistance," Dr. Wallace said in a conciliatory tone. "But as a doctor, I must warn you about the risks. Anxious attachment can evolve into more serious problems. I am only giving my professional opinion." After the doctor left, Mrs. Teresa looked at Richard with a stern expression. "You need to make a decision, son, for the emotional health of your daughters." Richard spent the rest of the day torn. He watched Emily with the girls, saw the genuine love in every gesture, every smile, every soft word. But he also saw the dependence. He saw how Eleanor desperately stretched her arms out when Emily left her line of sight. He saw how Hannah cried inconsolably until she heard the nanny's voice. He saw how all five only truly fell asleep peacefully when she sang. That night, he found Emily in the kitchen preparing bottles for the early morning feedings. She immediately noticed something was wrong. "Did something happen?" Richard sat at the table, his hands trembling slightly. "Emily, I need to be honest with you. My mother is worried. The doctor who came today said the girls have developed an anxious attachment, that it could be harmful for them in the future." Emily turned pale, dropping the bottle she was holding. "I only love them, Richard. I never meant to harm them." "I know. But maybe the doctor is right. Maybe I've been selfish, allowing you to become so important to them when I know that one day you'll want your own life, your own family." Emily looked at him with teary eyes. "Are you firing me?" Richard couldn't answer immediately. The truth was, he didn't know what to do. The following days were tense in the Greenwich mansion. Richard postponed the decision about Emily, but Mrs. Teresa's presence made every moment heavier. His mother made subtle comments about the girl's excessive attachment, questioned Emily's methods, and suggested alternatives that involved more emotional distance. Emily, sensing the situation, tried to adapt. She began to encourage more interaction between the babies and Richard, stepping back when he was present, creating opportunities for the father to strengthen his bonds with his daughters. But it was painful for her, Richard could see. He saw the sadness in the young woman's eyes when she had to step away, when the girls cried for her, and she had to let Richard calm them alone. One morning, Mrs. Gable sought Richard out in his office with a worried expression. "Mr. Davenport, I need to tell you something. Last night I went to the kitchen for water and heard Miss Carter crying in her room. She was crying so hard it sounded like her heart was breaking." Richard felt a pang of guilt. He knew he was being unfair to Emily, punishing her for loving his daughters too much, but the doctor's words echoed in his mind. Anxious attachment, emotional dependence, developmental harm. That afternoon, Mrs. Teresa called him to the office again. She had more information, she said, from in-depth conversations with Emily's former employers. One of them, a woman named Patricia Sterling, had been particularly frank. "She told me something important," Mrs. Teresa began. "Her son, Michael, was a year old when Emily started working there. Within 6 months, the boy became so attached to her that when Patricia came home from work, Michael would cry and hide. He didn't want to be with his own mother. He called Emily Mommy and Patricia by her first name." Richard frowned. That doesn't sound like something Emily would do intentionally. Intentional or not, the result was devastating for that family. Patricia told me she had to take her son to therapy, that her marriage almost ended because her husband blamed her for working too much and letting someone else raise their child. When they finally let Emily go, the boy was distraught for weeks. And Emily, how did she react? Mrs. Teresa consulted her notes. Patricia said Emily was devastated, begged to stay, said she loved the boy as if he were her own son. That's when Patricia found out about the baby Emily had lost. She understood then that Emily wasn't just caring for her son. She was trying to replace the son she had lost. Richard was silent, processing. Could that be what was happening here too? Was Emily projecting her lost son onto his 5 girls? And if so, was that necessarily a bad thing? The babies were healthy, happy, loved. But there was another employer, Mrs. Teresa continued. Sandra Jennings, who hired Emily to care for newborn twins. She told me Emily was perfect during the day, but at night, when the parents were asleep, she would spend hours in the nursery just holding the babies, rocking them, talking to them about her lost son. Sandra discovered this by chance when she woke up in the middle of the night and heard it on the monitor. "Is that disturbing?" Richard asked, genuinely confused. "It's obsessive, son." Mrs. Teresa stepped closer. "Emily isn't a bad person, I'm not saying that, but she is a broken woman trying to heal herself through other people's children, and that sooner or later causes problems, for her and for the children she cares for." Richard ran a hand through his hair, exhausted. "So what do you suggest? That I fire the only person who has managed to bring peace to this house? That I hire another cold professional nanny who treats the girls like a job? I suggest you think about the long-term well-being of your daughters." Mrs. Teresa placed a hand on her son's shoulder. "I know it's hard, but you need to be a father now, not a friend. You need to make tough decisions to protect these girls." That night, Richard barely slept. He got up several times, went to the nursery, and watched the 5 sleeping peacefully in their lined-up cribs. He thought of Eleanor, his wife, of what she would say if she were there. She was practical, rational, always putting the well-being of her daughters above all else. She would probably agree with Mrs. Teresa. In the morning he made his decision. He found Emily in the nursery after breakfast, the 5 babies playing on the activity mat. He asked her to join him in the office. Her expression showed she already knew what was coming. "Emily," he began with difficulty, "you know how grateful I am for everything you've done for my daughters. You saved them when I thought there was no solution." "But," she completed, her voice trembling, "but I have to think about their future." The doctor was clear about the risks of anxious attachment, and the information about your previous jobs worries me. Not because I think you're a bad person, but because I see a pattern that could be harmful. Emily closed her eyes, tears silently streaming down. "I never wanted to harm anyone, Richard. I just love these girls. I love each of them as if they were my own." "I know, and that's the problem. They're not yours, Emily. They have a father who needs to be the primary figure in their lives, and as long as you're here, I'll always be second." "That's not true," she protested. "I've always encouraged your bond. I've always tried. You've tried now after my mother arrived and raised these issues, but in the first few months, you became everything to them, and I let it happen because I was desperate and you solved the problem. But that doesn't mean it was the right decision." Emily took a deep breath, trying to control herself. "So, you're firing me?" Richard nodded, feeling as if he were betraying someone. "I'll pay you 3 months severance in addition to what we agreed, and I can give references about your technical competence. But yes, I think it's best that you go." "Can I say goodbye to them?" Her voice was breaking. "I think it's better if you don't. It will be easier for everyone if it's quick." Emily looked at him with an expression of such deep pain that Richard almost took it back. Easier for whom, Richard? For you? Because for me, for the girls, it won't be easy at all. You're tearing me away from them as if I'm disposable, as if months of love and care mean nothing. They mean everything, Richard said quietly. That's why I have to do this now, before it means even more. Emily stood up, wiping her tears. Mrs. Teresa was waiting in the hallway with an approving expression. Emily walked past her without a word, went up to the room she had occupied for months, and began to pack her bags with trembling hands. From the nursery a cry began, then another, and another. The 5 babies had sensed the tension in the house, felt the anguish permeating the air. Mrs. Gable tried to calm them, but they rejected her arms, crying louder and louder. Emily heard it from her room and her heart broke. She came down the stairs with her small suitcase, past the nursery where the 5 were screaming in despair, and felt the tears fall uncontrollably. She stopped at the door, looking one last time at each little face, red from crying. Eleanor, always be strong and observant. Hannah, never lose your curiosity. Lily, your sensitivity is a gift, not a flaw. Sophie, your determination will take you far. Bella, keep taking care of your sisters, she murmured too softly to be heard over the crying. Then she walked out the front door where a taxi was already waiting. She didn't look back. She couldn't, or she wouldn't have the strength to leave. In the nursery, chaos erupted. The 5 babies cried with an intensity Richard had never seen, not even during the week from hell before Emily arrived. Mrs. Gable tried to pick them up, but they struggled. Richard tried to calm them, but they rejected his arms. Mrs. Teresa suggested bottles, music, toys. Nothing worked. An hour passed. 2, 3. The crying didn't stop. The babies began to refuse food and water. Their little faces became red and swollen. Tiny bodies trembled with exhaustion, but they continued to cry, as if calling for someone who would never return. Richard called Mrs. Potts, the 6th nanny, begging her to come back, even temporarily. She agreed to come, but when she arrived and saw the state of the girls, she shook her head. This isn't the cry of hungry or sleepy babies, Mr. Davenport. This is the despair of loss. They are grieving. How can 6-month-old babies be grieving? Mrs. Teresa asked skeptically. Babies feel much more than we imagine, Mrs. Potts replied, and quintuplets feel it multiplied. If one is desperate, the others feel it and amplify the despair. It's a self-feeding cycle. Night fell and the crying continued. Richard called Dr. Wallace at 10 o'clock, desperate. The doctor came immediately, examined the 5, and his face grew serious. They are becoming dehydrated. They need to accept fluids, or I'll have to admit them for intravenous hydration. Richard tried once more to give a bottle to Eleanor. She turned her face away, spitting out the liquid that managed to get into her mouth. The other 4 did the same. It was as if they had collectively decided they would not accept care from anyone else. Dr. Wallace called Richard and Mrs. Teresa into the hallway. I need to be honest with you. I underestimated the situation. What these babies have with Miss Carter isn't just anxious attachment. It's a genuine, deep bond. Separating such a young child from their primary attachment figure can cause severe psychological trauma. In quintuplets, this trauma is amplified. Are you saying I made a mistake? Richard asked, his voice hoarse. I'm saying the solution I suggested was inadequate for this specific situation. Every case is unique and this one is exceptionally complex. The doctor took a deep breath. If they don't accept fluids in the next few hours, I will have to admit them, and even then the emotional trauma could have lasting consequences. Richard felt the world crumble around him. He looked at his mother, who for the first time seemed unsure of her convictions. What do I do? He asked, more to himself than to the others. Mrs. Gable, who had heard everything from the hallway, spoke for the first time. You know what you need to do, Mr. Davenport. You need to bring Miss Carter back. It was 3 in the morning when Richard finally got Emily's phone number from the agency. His hands trembled as he dialed, listening to the ring repeat once, twice, 3 times. In the nursery, the cries of the 5 continued relentlessly, weaker now due to exhaustion, but still present like an open wound that wouldn't heal. Emily answered on the 4th ring, her voice thick with tears and sleep. "Hello? Emily, it's me, Richard. I need you to come back. Please." The girls are in despair. It's been 14 hours since you left, and they haven't stopped crying. They won't take food, they won't take water. The doctor said he'll have to admit them if they don't. Get better. Silence on the other end. Richard heard a shaky breath, then a muffled sob. "Richard, I can't go through this again. I can't get even more attached and then be torn away from them again." "It won't happen again," he promised desperately. "I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I listened to the wrong people, I made the wrong decision. Please, Emily. The girls need you. I need you." "Did your mother agree to this?" Her voice was firm despite the tears. Richard looked at Mrs. Teresa, who was standing at the nursery door with a look of defeat. "My mother realized she was wrong. We all did. I need to hear that from her." Richard handed the phone to his mother. Mrs. Teresa hesitated, but took the device. "Miss Carter, this is Teresa Davenport. I need to apologize. I interfered in a situation I didn't fully understand. My granddaughters need you, and I was wrong to try to separate you from them." There was a long pause before Emily replied. "I'll come back, but not as a nanny. I can't work under the constant threat of being fired when someone decides I love these girls too much. Either I am a permanent part of their lives or I can't continue." "What are you proposing?" Richard asked, taking the phone back. "I don't know yet. I just know my heart can't take being broken again. These 5 babies have become the reason I wake up in the morning, the reason I want to live again after feeling dead inside for so long. They're not just a job to me, Richard. They're everything." "Then be everything," Richard said, without fully thinking about what that meant. "Be what they need you to be. Mother, aunt, guardian, the title doesn't matter. Just come back. I'm in a cab. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Richard hung up and ran back to the nursery. The 5 were still crying, but it was a different cry now, weaker, more resigned, as if they had lost hope. Mrs. Potts had managed to get Lily to accept a few milliliters of water, but the other 4 rejected everything. "She's coming," Richard announced to the room. "Emily is coming back. Hold on, girls, she's coming." As if they understood, the crying lessened slightly. Eleanor opened her swollen eyes and looked at the door as if expecting to see Emily appear at any moment. Hannah stopped struggling in Mrs. Potts's arms. Lily sobbed more quietly. Sophie and Bella continued to cry, but less intensely. Mrs. Teresa sat in the armchair in the corner, looking as if she had aged 10 years in those hours. "I caused this," she said quietly. "I wanted to control a situation I didn't understand, to use my influence to impose my vision of how things should be, and I almost destroyed my granddaughters in the process." Richard said nothing. He was too tired to argue, too anxious for Emily's arrival. He stood at the window watching the street, waiting to see the taxi's headlights. When they finally appeared, he raced down the stairs. He opened the door before Emily even rang the bell. She was wearing the same clothes she had left in, her face marked by tears, her eyes red and swollen. She carried only her small handbag. "Are they in the nursery?" she asked without preamble. Richard just nodded. Emily ran up the stairs, leaving her bag in the middle of the hallway. She entered the nursery, and what happened next was something no one present would ever forget. The 5 babies, who had been crying for 14 uninterrupted hours, stopped simultaneously as soon as they saw Emily. For a moment there was total silence, as if time had frozen. Then Eleanor began to make that high-pitched sound babies make when they desperately want something. The other 4 imitated her, all extending their little arms towards Emily with a heart-wrenching urgency. Emily crossed the room in 3 steps, picked up Eleanor and Hannah, knelt so that Lily, Sophie, and Bella could touch her, and began to cry along with them. "I'm here, my loves, I'm here, and I'm never leaving. Again, I promise I will never leave you again." The babies' cries turned into sobs of relief. One by one, they calmed down, snuggling against Emily as if they wanted to merge with her. Emily hummed the lullaby she always used, her voice trembling but steady. "Sleep, my love, sleep in peace, the night has come and the day is gone." Mrs. Potts discreetly left the room, wiping away tears. Mrs. Gable had her hand on her heart, visibly moved. Dr. Wallace watched everything with the expression of someone witnessing something extraordinary. And Mrs. Teresa, Proud Teresa Davenport, who always knew what was best for everyone, wept silently in the corner. Richard stood at the door watching. Emily managed to feed all 5 in sequence. They all accepted their bottles eagerly, as if they finally felt safe enough to satisfy their hunger and thirst. Then she changed diapers, cleaned faces, and murmured words of comfort to each one. By 5 in the morning, all 5 were sleeping soundly for the first time in 14 hours. Emily placed them in their cribs with extreme care, adjusted the blankets and stood for a moment just watching them sleep, tears still streaming down her face. When she came out of the nursery, she found Richard waiting in the hallway. He said nothing, just hugged her. It was a hug of gratitude, of relief, of apology. Emily returned it, finally allowing herself to break down after hours of maintaining her composure. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I'm sorry for doubting you, for listening to other people instead of trusting my own judgment. I'm sorry for causing so much suffering to the girls and to you." Emily pulled away, wiping her face. "I understand why you did it. You were trying to protect them. But Richard, you need to understand something about me, about my past." They went down to the kitchen where Mrs. Gable made strong coffee. They sat at the table as the sun began to rise through the window. Emily took a deep breath before she began to speak. "My son's name was Leo. I was in my 8th month when he stopped moving. I went to the hospital and they told me his heart had stopped. No one knows why. Sometimes these things just happen," the doctors said, as if that made it easier to accept. I had to go through labor, knowing that at the end, I wouldn't hear a cry, wouldn't see him open his eyes, wouldn't hold him alive in my arms. Her voice broke, but she continued. "They let me hold him for a few hours. He was a beautiful boy, perfect in every way, except he wasn't breathing. He had the tiniest fingers, the little nails I had imagined painting when he grew up, his father's small nose. I sang to him, apologized for not being strong enough to keep him alive, promised I would never forget him." Richard took her hand across the table, squeezing it tightly. "I'm so sorry, Emily. No one should have to go through that. After he was gone, not the way they take a living baby from you, but the way they take something that has already lost its life. I fell into a deep darkness. I didn't want to live. I saw no point in anything. My boyfriend couldn't stand to see me like that and left. My family tried to help, but they didn't know how. I was lost." She took a sip of coffee, her hands trembling slightly. "It was my grandmother who saved me. She had been delivering babies. For 50 years, a traditional midwife in the countryside. She said the best way to honor my son would be to care for other people's children, to give them the love I would have given Leo. At first I resisted. I thought it was impossible. But she insisted, and eventually I agreed to watch a neighbor's son for a few hours." "And you found that it helped?" Richard asked softly. "I found that it gave my pain a purpose. Every baby I fed, every diaper I changed, every cry I soothed, was a way of saying that my son had existed, that he mattered, that the love I had to give didn't die with him." Emily looked at Richard intently. "Yes, I get attached to the children I care for. Yes, I love them deeply, but it's not unhealthy or harmful. It's my way of surviving, of transforming the greatest tragedy of my life into something that has meaning." Mrs. Teresa entered the kitchen at that moment, having heard the conversation from the doorway. "Miss Carter, I need to apologize again. I judged your pain without trying to understand it. I tried to protect my granddaughters from something that wasn't a threat, and in the process I almost harmed them irreparably." Emily faced her for a moment before nodding. "I understand, Mrs. Davenport. You were trying to protect your family. It's what any grandmother would do, but I would never be able to hurt these girls. They saved me as much as I saved them." Richard looked at the two women, realizing that something fundamental had changed in that house. "So what do we do now?" he asked. "How do we move forward?" Emily hesitated before answering. "I can't just be a nanny anymore, Richard. Not after everything that's happened. Either I am a permanent part of these girls' lives, someone they can count on to always be there, or I need to find the courage to leave for good and let them move on with someone else." Richard looked at her, at the woman who had saved his daughters, who loved them with an intensity that was frightening but also wondrous. "Then be a permanent part," he said with conviction. "Be the mother they need." Richard's words hung in the kitchen air like something tangible. Be the mother they need. Emily looked at him with wide eyes, processing what that meant. Mrs. Teresa remained silent, watching the interaction between the two with a thoughtful expression. "You can't just say that, Richard," Emily finally said, her voice trembling. "Being a mother isn't a title you give someone because it's convenient. It's a lifelong commitment." "I know," he replied with conviction, "and that's exactly why I'm saying it. It's not convenience, Emily. It's a recognition of what already exists. You are already a mother to these girls in every way but on paper." "But they have a mother," Emily protested. "Eleanor, I should never try to take her place." "I'm not asking you to take her place," Richard said softly. "I'm asking you to fill the space that exists now, the space for someone who cares, who loves, who is present. Eleanor will always be their biological mother, their first mother. But they need someone here now, and you are that person." Mrs. Teresa finally spoke. "My son is right, Miss Carter. I was wrong to try and separate you from the girls. What happened in the last few hours has proven that the bond between you is real and necessary. If you accept, you will have my full support." Emily stood up from the table, walking to the window that overlooked the garden where the sun had now fully risen. She thought of Leo, of what he would be like now if he had lived. He would be almost 3, starting to speak in full sentences, maybe already in preschool. But he wasn't, and he never would be. And here in this house were 5 babies who needed her as much as she needed them. "I accept," she said, turning to Richard and Mrs. Teresa. "I accept being the mother they need. But it needs to be clear, to everyone, to them when they grow up, that they had a wonderful biological mother who loved them from the very first moment. I don't want to erase Eleanor's memory." "Never," Richard promised. "Eleanor will always be part of their story. But now, so will you." The following days were about reorganization and adaptation. Richard spoke with his lawyers about the best way to ensure Emily had legal rights over the girls. The initial suggestion was a formal adoption, but that would take time and bureaucracy. That's when Richard had an idea that surprised even himself. A week after Emily's return, he called her into his office late in the afternoon. The girls were napping after their bath, and the house was in a rare moment of silence. Emily entered with a curious expression, sitting in the chair he indicated. "I've thought a lot about our conversation," Richard began, his hands clasped on the desk. "About how to ensure you are a permanent part of the girls' lives, legally and irrevocably. And I've come to a conclusion that might seem absurd at first, but it makes perfect sense when you look at the situation." Emily tilted her head, waiting. "I want you to marry me." The silence that followed was absolute. Emily blinked several times as if unsure she had heard correctly. "Are you proposing to me?" "I'm proposing a legal union that would automatically give you full rights over the girls. As my wife, you would legally be their mother." Richard leaned forward. "I know this isn't a traditional proposal. I'm not saying I'm in love with you. That would be dishonest after such a short time. But I have a deep respect and gratitude for you, and I believe we could build a solid partnership based on the mutual love we have for the girls." "You're proposing a marriage of convenience," Emily said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I'm proposing a real commitment based on different foundations than the traditional ones," Richard corrected. "Many marriages start with overwhelming passion and end when that passion fades. Ours would start with respect, partnership, and a common goal, raising 5 happy and healthy girls, and who knows what might develop over time." Emily stood up, walking to the window. "This is crazy, Richard. People will think you've lost your mind. Your mother just accepted my presence in the girls' lives. Imagine what she'll think of a marriage." "My mother will understand," he said with conviction, "and I don't care what other people think. I care about the well-being of my daughters and about giving you the security that you won't be torn from their lives again." Emily turned to him, tears in her eyes. "What if it doesn't work? What if we find we can't live together? What if you meet someone and fall in love for real? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But Emily, I'm not looking to fall in love. My heart still belongs to..." "Eleanor," And I don't know if that will ever change. I'm offering you partnership, companionship, a family. It's not romantic love, but it's something real and valuable." She took a deep breath. "I need to think." "Of course. Take all the time you need. But know that the offer is genuine and comes from a place of deep respect for who you are and what you do for us." Emily spent the next 3 days in internal conflict. She talked to Mrs. Gable, who surprisingly supported the idea. "The girls need a structured family," the housekeeper said, "and Mr. Davenport is a good man. It may not be a fairy tale love, but sometimes the strongest love is the one you build brick by brick." She also spoke with Mrs. Teresa, who was initially shocked but later reflected. "My marriage to Richard's father was arranged by our families," the older woman admitted. "Over time we developed a deep and lasting love. Sometimes the best foundations are the practical ones, not the emotional ones." But it was when she was alone in her room at night, after putting the 5 to sleep, that Emily truly reflected. She thought of Leo, of how she had dreamed of having a traditional family with him. She thought of Leo's father, who had abandoned her when she needed him most. She thought of how the last few months in this house had given her something she thought she had lost forever: purpose, joy, a reason to wake up in the morning. The 5 girls had saved her as much as she had saved them. When she held Eleanor and saw those serious little eyes observing everything, when she heard Hannah's curious laugh, when she felt Lily snuggle into her lap, when she saw Sophie's determination to reach a toy, when Bella reached out her little hand to gently touch her face, Emily felt her heart expand in a way she never imagined possible after losing Leo. Was she betraying her son's memory by agreeing to be a mother to 5 other children? Or was she honoring him by using all the love she would have given him to care for those who needed it? Emily concluded that Leo would have wanted her to be happy, to find a way to move on. And these 5 girls were her way. On the 3rd day, she went to Richard's office. He was reviewing blueprints for a new project, but dropped everything when she entered. His gaze was anxious, but trying to hide it. "I accept," Emily said without preamble. "I accept your proposal of marriage, not because it's the easiest or most convenient solution, but because I can't imagine my life without these 5 girls. They have become my reason for living. And if marrying you is what guarantees I will never be separated from them again, then that's what I will do." Richard stood up, rounding the desk to stand in front of her. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I will do my best to make sure you don't regret this decision. It may not be the wedding of your dreams, but I promise you respect, partnership, and a home full of love for the girls." "One thing needs to be clear," Emily said firmly. "We will have separate bedrooms. This is not a marriage in the full sense. It's a legal and practical partnership." "Understood," Richard agreed immediately. "You set the boundaries, and I will respect them. And when the girls are older, we will tell them the truth about how this all started. I don't want any lies or pretense." "I completely agree." Richard extended his hand. "Partners, then?" Emily shook his hand, feeling the weight of the commitment she was making. "Partners." Mrs. Teresa was informed that same evening. She was silent for a long moment before speaking. "It's an unconventional decision, but in this house, we've learned that conventions aren't always the best path. If you both believe it's the right thing to do, you have my blessing." Mrs. Gable cried with joy when she found out. "I always knew Miss Emily was special," she said, hugging the young woman. "Now you'll officially be part of this family." The preparations began discreetly. Richard wanted a simple civil ceremony, but Mrs. Teresa insisted on a small but dignified ceremony in the property's chapel. "Nothing too elaborate, just close family and a few intimate friends," she said. "The girls need to see that this is real and important." Emily didn't have much family. Her parents had passed away when she was young, and she only had a few distant cousins she rarely saw. But her grandmother, the one who had encouraged her to care for babies after losing Leo, was still alive in a small town upstate. Emily called her, explaining the situation. "My dear girl," her grandmother said in an emotional voice, "you are doing the right thing. God works in mysterious ways. You lost 1 son, but gained 5 daughters, and a husband who respects you can turn into a husband who loves you over time. You go with Grandma's blessing. During the months of preparation, Richard and Emily developed a comfortable routine. He would come home from work and have dinner with her and the girls. On weekends, they would take trips to the park with the five in the special quintuplet stroller Richard had custom made. To an outsider, they were a normal family. Only they knew that a distance still remained between them, a formality that didn't completely dissolve. But there were moments of genuine connection, like when Eleanor took her first wobbly steps and the two of them looked at each other with pride, or when Hannah caught a cold and they stayed up all night together taking care of her, or when the five turned 9 months old and they had a small party where they laughed together, watching the girls destroy their little cakes. One day, 2 weeks before the wedding, Richard found Emily crying in the nursery after putting the girls to sleep. He hesitated at the door, unsure whether to enter or respect the private moment. But Emily saw him and gestured for him to come in. "I'm sorry," she said, wiping her face. "It's just that sometimes I think of Eleanor, of how she should be here experiencing all of this. The first laughs, the first steps, the first teeth coming in. She planned everything with so much love, and she's not here to see it. I feel guilty for being in her place." Richard sat beside her on the nursery floor. "You're not in her place, Emily. You're in a different place that came to be because Eleanor couldn't be here. And don't feel guilty. Eleanor would have loved you for taking care of her daughters with so much affection. She was generous like that, always thinking of others' well-being above her own pride." "You still love her very much," Emily said quietly. "I always will," Richard admitted. "But that doesn't mean there isn't room for other kinds of love in my life. I admire you deeply, Emily. Your strength, your dedication, your enormous heart. It may not be the romantic love that society glorifies, but it's real and valuable." Emily looked at him, and for the first time since they met, she felt something beyond respect or gratitude. She felt a genuine connection with this man who had also suffered loss, who was also trying to rebuild his life in an unconventional way. Maybe, just maybe, this could turn into something deeper over time. The wedding day dawned sunny and mild, a Saturday in October with a pleasant temperature and a cloudless sky. The chapel on the property, which was rarely used, had been decorated with white flowers and simple but elegant arrangements. Mrs. Teresa had overseen every detail, ensuring everything was perfect without being ostentatious. Emily woke up early in the room she had occupied since returning to the mansion. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman she saw. The dress had been chosen by Mrs. Teresa, a simple but sophisticated model in natural silk that enhanced her delicate figure without being over the top. No long veil or dramatic train. It was a dress for an intimate ceremony, not a spectacle. Emily's grandmother had arrived the day before from upstate. The 78-year-old woman, small but energetic, hugged her granddaughter tightly when she saw her. "You're making the right choice, my girl. I saw in that man's eyes that he is decent and honorable, and those 5 little ones need you as much as you need them." Now, as Emily finished getting ready with Mrs. Gable's help, she heard a cry from the nursery. It was Sophie, always the most determined and least willing to wait for anything. Emily smiled. That sound, which months ago would have made her anxious, now calmed her. It was familiar. It was home. "I'll go," she said, standing up. "Miss Emily, it's your wedding day," Mrs. Gable protested. "I'll take care of them." But Emily was already leaving the room. She entered the nursery and found the 5 waking up one by one. Sophie was crying, Hannah was fussing, Eleanor was observing the ceiling with a serious expression, Lily was stretching with soft noises, and Bella was looking at her sisters as if checking if they were all okay. "Good morning, my beautiful girls," Emily said, picking up Sophie and then juggling to accommodate the others as well. "Are you going to be pretty today? Are you going to wear those special little dresses that Grandma Teresa had made?" The outfits were identical, in shades of light pink with white details, each with the baby's name discreetly embroidered. Mrs. Teresa's idea was for them to be the flower girls, even though they were too young to understand the concept. "We'll have to take lots of pictures to show them when they're older," the grandmother had said a few days earlier. Richard knocked on the nursery door half an hour later. He was already dressed in an elegant grey suit, no tie. a choice that made him look both formal and approachable. He stopped when he saw Emily with the 5, still in her wedding dress, feeding them with an ease that came from practice. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Emily looked down, realizing she had completely forgotten she was in a wedding dress. "Thank you, the girls woke up and I couldn't resist." Richard smiled, approaching. "Can I help?" Together, they finished feeding and changing the 5. As they worked side by side, there was a naturalness that hadn't existed before. Small accidental touches, shared smiles when Hannah spat puree on her bib, the silent teamwork of people who have developed a synchrony. "Are you nervous?" Richard asked as he dressed Eleanor carefully. "A little." Emily put the outfit on Lily. "Not about the wedding itself, but about the meaning. After today, I will officially be their mother. It's a huge responsibility. A responsibility you've already been fulfilling for months," Richard reminded her. "Today, we're just making official what already exists." The ceremony was scheduled for 11 o'clock. Mark, Richard's partner, would be his witness. Emily's grandmother would be hers. A few distant cousins of Richard, close colleagues, and Mrs. Gable made up the small group of guests. There were no more than 20 people. When the time came, Emily walked to the chapel with her grandmother by her side. The 5 girls were in a special stroller decorated with flowers, pushed by Mrs. Gable. It wouldn't be traditional, but nothing about this situation was. Richard waited at the altar with the priest, an elderly man who had known the family for decades and had been informed of the special circumstances of this marriage. The priest conducted the ceremony with sensitivity, speaking about different kinds of love, about commitment, about family built not just on blood, but on choice and dedication. When it came time for the vows, Richard took Emily's hands and spoke with sincerity. "Emily Carter, I promise to respect you every day. I promise to be your partner, companion, and friend. I promise to honor the love you have for our daughters and to do everything in my power to make you happy in this home. I can't promise romantic love right now, but I promise to be present, to be honest, and to build something real and lasting with you." Emily felt tears stream down as she spoke her own vows. "Richard Davenport, I promise to care for your daughters as if they were born from me. I promise to honor Eleanor's memory and ensure they grow up knowing how much she loved them. I promise to be your partner, companion, and friend. And I promise to give this family all the dedication I have in my heart." The rings were exchanged, simple gold bands without excessive adornment. When the priest said Richard could kiss the bride, there was a moment of hesitation. They both knew this would be their first kiss and that it would be watched by all present. Richard leaned in slowly, giving Emily time to pull back if she wanted. She didn't. The kiss was brief, chaste, a touch of lips that sealed the commitment but respected the boundaries they had set. The guests applauded. From the stroller, Sophie began to cry, not out of distress, but because she wanted attention. Emily went to them instinctively, picking up Sophie and then gesturing for the others to be brought to her. In seconds, she was surrounded by the 5 and Richard joined them. The photographer captured that moment, the newlyweds surrounded by the Quintuplets, an unconventional but complete family. Lunch was served in the mansion's garden, round tables with white tablecloths, simple arrangements, elegant but not ostentatious food. The 5 girls sat in special high chairs near the bride and groom's table, and Mrs. Gable fed them while the adults ate and talked. Mark made a funny toast about how Richard was married to his work until he met Emily and the girls, and how he had never seen his friend so present and dedicated to something other than the construction company. Emily's grandmother made an emotional toast about second chances and how life always finds a way to heal our wounds if we let it. Mrs. Teresa was the last to toast, and her words surprised many. "When Emily came to this house," she admitted, "I judged her without knowing her. I tried to separate her from my granddaughters because I was afraid of the unknown, afraid of losing control. But my son taught me that control is not the same as protection. And Emily taught me that genuine love does not respect social conventions. Today, I officially welcome her as a member of this family, and I apologize for almost destroying something precious out of pride and prejudice. After lunch, many guests left. Only the closest family and Mrs. Gable remained. Richard and Emily spent the afternoon in the garden with the girls, letting them explore the grass under supervision. It was a domestic and peaceful scene without drama or expectations. That evening, after putting the five to sleep with their established routine, Richard and Emily met on the porch with tea. They sat in silence for a while, just listening to the night sounds of the garden. "It was a beautiful day," Emily said finally. "It was," Richard agreed. "Different from what I imagined when I was young and thought about marriage, but meaningful in its own way." "Do you have any regrets?" Her voice was low, vulnerable. Richard looked at her sincerely. "No, not at all. And you?" Emily shook her head. "No, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." In the following months, life in the mansion found a new balance. Richard and Emily developed an efficient partnership in caring for the girls. He took on more responsibilities, learning to give baths, change diapers, rock them to sleep. Emily taught him techniques that worked for each one, respecting their unique personalities. The five began to develop rapidly. Eleanor took her first steps at 10 months, always cautious and calculated. Hannah followed 2 weeks later, but more adventurously, without fear of falling. Lily waited until she was absolutely sure before trying, finally walking at 11 months. Sophie was stubborn, refusing help and insisting on doing it herself. Bella was the last, but when she finally walked, she made a point of going to each sister, as if checking if they were all proud of her. Richard returned to work full-time, but always came home at 6 in the evening. They had dinner together as a family, he and Emily talking about their day while the girls made a mess with their food. They were simple but significant moments. One night, a few months after the wedding, Richard found Emily in the library looking at photo albums. They were albums Eleanor had made, documenting the pregnancy and preparations for the quintuplets' arrival. Emily had tears in her eyes as she saw the photos of his radiant wife, the huge belly, the eyes shining with expectation. "She was very beautiful," Emily said when she noticed his presence. Richard sat beside her, taking the album. She was, and so excited about the girls. She spent months choosing names, decorating the nursery, reading everything about multiple child development. "Will the girls know all of this?" Emily asked. "Will they know how much she loved them even without having met them?" "They will," Richard promised. "We'll tell them stories about her, show them photos, make sure she is always a part of their lives." He turned a page, showing Eleanor painting the nursery. "See, she painted those murals on the wall. She said she wanted each daughter to have something special, just for her." Emily touched the photo reverently. "She would have been a wonderful mother." "She would have," Richard agreed. "And you are. Not in the same way, but in an equally valuable way." Emily looked at him, and something passed between them. An understanding, a connection that went beyond a practical partnership. Richard realized he had been looking at Emily differently lately, not with the overwhelming passion he had felt for Eleanor at first, but with a deep admiration, a growing affection, an appreciation for who she was and what they were doing together. "Emily," he began hesitantly, "I know we established that this would be a practical partnership, but I have to be honest. I've developed feelings for you that go beyond respect or gratitude." Emily held her breath. "What kind of feelings?" "The kind that makes me want to spend more time with you, not just because of the girls, but because I enjoy your company. The kind that makes me notice little things, like how you hum softly while you cook, or how your eyes light up when the girls do something new." He paused. "I'm not saying I'm in love. I don't know if my heart is capable of that again after Eleanor, but I am saying that you've become important to me in ways I didn't anticipate." Emily wiped away a tear. "Me too, Richard. I've also felt something changing. You're kind, dedicated, a wonderful father, and at some point I stopped seeing you just as my employer or partner of convenience. I started seeing you as someone I truly admire and care about." They sat in silence, processing their confessions. "So, what do we do?" Richard asked. "Let's take it slow," Emily suggested. "No pressure, no expectations. We let this develop naturally if it's meant to. We continue to be partners, but we're open to seeing where this leads us." Richard agreed, taking her hand and lacing his fingers through hers. "That sounds perfect to me." A year passed since the wedding. The Quintuplets were 1.5, their personalities more defined, starting to speak simple words and showing clear preferences. Eleanor was the natural leader, serious and observant, always checking where everyone was before doing something. Hannah was the explorer, constantly trying to reach places she shouldn't. Lily was the sensitive one, crying when someone got hurt, even if it wasn't her. Sophie was the stubborn one, refusing help even when she desperately needed it. Bella was the mediator, always trying to keep the peace between her sisters. The relationship between Richard and Emily had evolved gradually. There was no defining moment, no dramatic declaration of love. It happened in small gestures. A hand reached for during a movie, a lingering goodnight kiss, a night when Richard entered her room with a cup of tea, and they ended up talking until dawn, and he fell asleep on the sofa next to her bed. The next morning they woke up together for the first time, and it felt natural. Weeks later, Emily shyly suggested that maybe they didn't need separate rooms anymore. Richard agreed, but made it clear that she was in complete control of the pace. "I don't want you to feel pressured," he said. "We have the rest of our lives." The change was gradual. First, Richard started sleeping a few nights in her room. Then he brought some of his clothes over. Eventually, his original room became a secondary office. Physical intimacy came naturally, without rush, based on trust built over months. It was on one of those nights, lying together, after putting the girls to sleep, that Emily brought up a delicate subject. "Richard, have you ever thought about having more children?" He was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, no. 5 already seem like more than enough." "Why? Do you want to?" Emily hesitated. "I don't know. Sometimes I think so, other times I think it's crazy. But there's something inside me that never had the chance to experience full motherhood. Pregnancy, childbirth, breastfeeding. With the girls, I came in after it had all happened." "I understand," Richard said thoughtfully. "And if it happened naturally, would you like that?" "I think so." Emily turned to look at him. "But what about you? Would it be fair? Eleanor gave you 5 daughters at once, to ask you to go through all of that again." "Emily, if it happens, we'll handle it." Richard pulled her close. "Do the girls need another brother or sister? Probably not. But if one comes, they will be loved just as much as the 5. 3 months later, Emily discovered she was pregnant. The news came with a mix of confusing emotions: joy at finally experiencing full motherhood, fear that something would go wrong as it had with Leo, worry about whether she would be able to care for a baby and 5 toddlers simultaneously. Richard received the news with initial surprise, followed by genuine joy. He hugged Emily tightly, saying he was happy, and they would do it together. But Emily saw something in his eyes, a shadow of concern. She knew what he was thinking. Eleanor, the quintuplet pregnancy, the birth that resulted in 5 living babies, but a wife who had passed. At night, lying together, Richard admitted his fears. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know it's irrational, but I'm afraid of losing you. Too afraid that history will repeat itself." "It won't repeat," Emily promised. "This is a single pregnancy, not quintuplets, completely different, and I'll do all the tests, follow all the medical recommendations. I'll be fine, Richard." In the following months, the pregnancy progressed without complications. Emily gained weight appropriately, had regular prenatal care, and followed all the guidelines. The quintuplets, now 2 years old, noticed something changing in their mother's body. Emily bent down one day to pick up Eleanor, and the little girl touched her small but visible belly and said, "Mommy, baby," her first 2-word sentence. "Yes, my love," Emily replied emotionally. "There's a baby in here. It's going to be your little brother or sister." "Baby!" Hannah shouted excitedly, running to touch it too. The other 3 joined in, 5 small hands touching Emily's belly with curiosity and surprise. Richard documented everything with photos and videos. Unlike with Eleanor's pregnancy, where anxiety dominated due to the risks of a quintuplet gestation, this time there was genuine joy mixed with normal concern. They went to ultrasounds together, found out it would be a boy, and chose the name Gabriel. Mrs. Teresa visited frequently during the pregnancy, bringing vitamins, books on newborn care, and offering help. The relationship between her and Emily had completely transformed. The mother-in-law now saw her daughter-in-law as a blessing to the family, admired her dedication, and was genuinely happy with the news of another grandchild. "You'll see how different it is with just one," Mrs. Teresa joked. "After 5 at once, one baby will seem like a piece of cake." When Emily entered her 8th month, Richard began to get visibly anxious. She noticed him watching her constantly, checking if she was okay, insisting she rest more. One night she gently confronted him. "Richard, I need you to trust that everything will be okay. Your fear is making me nervous, and that's not good for me or the baby." "I'm sorry," he said, running a hand through his hair. "It's just that when I look at you pregnant, I remember Eleanor. The last few months when she could barely walk, when she was in constant pain, and the delivery that was a nightmare." Emily took his face in her hands. "I am not Eleanor, and this is not that pregnancy. I understand your trauma, but you can't project it onto me. I need you to be strong and confident, to make me feel safe, not more anxious." Richard nodded, pulling her into a hug. "You're right. I'll try. I promise." Gabriel was born on a March morning, after just 6 hours of labor. It was a normal delivery, without complications, and when Emily heard her son's strong cry for the first time, she burst into tears. It was the cry she hadn't heard from Leo, the sound she had always dreamed of and never had. Richard was by her side, holding her hand, also crying, this time with relief and joy. "He's perfect," the doctor said, placing the baby on Emily's chest. "A healthy boy, 7.5 pounds. Congratulations." Emily looked at that red, wrinkled face, the closed eyes, the little mouth making small movements. It was her son, her biological son, born from her, breathing and alive. She looked at Richard, who was watching her tenderly. "And ours," she said. "Our son." Richard kissed her forehead. "Our son," he repeated. The Quintuplets met their little brother 2 days later when Emily came home. Mrs. Gable had prepared the girls, explaining that Mommy was coming home with a surprise. When Emily entered, with Gabriel in her arms, the 5 were fascinated. They wanted to touch, to see up close, asking incomprehensible questions in their 2-year-old language. "Small," said Eleanor, touching Gabriel's tiny hand. "Baby sleep," observed Hannah, seeing his closed eyes. "Pretty," decided Lily. "Mine," declared Sophie, trying to grab him. "Careful," warned Bella, already taking on her role as the protective older sister. Richard and Emily looked at each other and laughed. With 6 children now, the house would be even more chaotic, but it was a chaos filled with love, with life, with joyful noise instead of desperate crying. In the first few months of Gabriel's life, the family dynamic adjusted. The Quintuplets, now almost 3, were independent in many ways. They ate by themselves, though they made a mess. They used the potty with help. They played together for long periods. This allowed Emily to dedicate time to the baby without neglecting the others. Richard took on more responsibilities with the girls, taking them to the park on weekends, while Emily rested with Gabriel. They hired an assistant, a young woman named Lucy, to help with basic tasks, but the children's primary connection remained with their parents. Mrs. Teresa visited when Gabriel was 2 months old. She asked to hold her grandson and spent a long time just watching the baby sleep. Emily noticed tears in her mother-in-law's eyes. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Teresa?" The older woman nodded, wiping her eyes. "It's just that I remember when Richard was born. It feels like yesterday, but it's been over 30 years. And now I look at you with your 6 children, building this beautiful family, and I realize how wrong I was at the beginning. I almost destroyed all of this because of pride." "You've apologized several times already," Emily said softly, "and you've been forgiven. The important thing is that we're all here now together." Mrs. Teresa looked at her daughter-in-law with admiration. "You are an extraordinary woman, Emily. Stronger than I ever was. To lose a son, be rejected by the man you loved, and still find the strength to love again, to care for 5 children not born of you, and now to have your own son. It's inspiring." Emily felt tears well up. "Thank you. That means a lot coming from you." That night, after putting all the children to sleep, a task that now took over, 2 hours considering the different needs of each age, Richard and Emily met on the porch. Gabriel was sleeping in his bassinet beside them, the quintuplets finally quiet in their nursery-turned-toddler room. "Tired?" Richard asked. "Exhausted," Emily admitted with a smile, "but happy. I never imagined I would have all this. A big family. A husband who loves me." Richard pulled her close. "I love you, you know. Not in the way I loved Eleanor, but in a way that's just as deep. You taught me that the heart has an infinite capacity to love in different ways." Emily rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you too. And I love these 6 children more than anything in the world, even on the chaotic days when I'm exhausted and covered in baby food and tantrum tears. I wouldn't trade this for anything." They stayed there, watching the stars, listening to the night sounds of the garden and Gabriel's soft breathing. It was peace. It was home. It was a family built not just on blood, but on choice, dedication, and unconditional love. 3 years passed since Gabriel's birth. The Greenwich mansion had transformed into a true home, full of life and noise. The quintuplets were now 5.5, already in kindergarten, each showing unique talents and interests. Eleanor loved books, spending hours flipping through pages even without being able to fully read. Hannah was fascinated by animals, always bringing insects in from the garden to Mrs. Gable's horror. Lily loved music, humming constantly and asking for violin lessons. Sophie was athletic, running faster than everyone and never getting tired. Bella was the artist, drawing and painting everything she saw. Gabriel at 3 was a whirlwind of energy, always running after his older sisters, trying to keep up with everything. They did. He had Emily's eyes and Richard's smile, a combination that could melt anyone. He called the quintuplets his sissies, and they protected him fiercely, even when he destroyed their toys or disrupted their games. But there was other news in the family. Emily was pregnant again, now 8 months along, expecting a girl who would be named Alice. The pregnancy had been planned this time. Richard and Emily had talked at length about expanding the family once more. 6 is already a lot, Richard had argued. "Are you sure you can handle it?" "I am," Emily had said, with conviction. "The girls are older. Gabriel is growing up. We have help. And I want Gabriel to have someone closer to his age. The girls have each other. He needs a brother or sister." Alice's arrival was expected in 3 weeks. The house was in preparation mode. The nursery had been reassembled after being stored for years. The quintuplets were excited, especially Bella, who insisted on helping decorate the baby's room. It was on a Saturday afternoon that something special happened. The quintuplets were playing in the garden under Lucy's supervision when Eleanor, always the most observant, asked a question no one expected. "Mommy Emily," she said in her serious 5-year-old voice, "do we have 2 mummies?" Emily was sitting on the porch with Gabriel on her lap, her enormous belly making it difficult to move. Richard was beside her, working on his laptop. They both froze at the question. It was a conversation they knew they would have to have eventually, but they didn't expect it so soon. "Why do you ask that, sweetie?" Emily replied carefully. Eleanor approached, the other 4 following curiously. "Because at school there are pictures for Mother's Day and the teacher said everyone has one mum, but Grandma Teresa said we have the mommy who's in heaven and you, that's 2. Richard and Emily looked at each other. They had discussed this moment several times, prepared answers, but in the real moment, it was different. Richard was the one who spoke first. "Come here, girls, let's talk about this." The 5 sat on the porch floor in a semicircle, waiting. Gabriel got off Emily's lap and sat among his sisters. Richard took a deep breath before he began. "You're right, you had 2 mothers. The first was Eleanor, who was married to me before you were born. She became pregnant with all 5 of you at the same time, which is very rare and special. For 9 months she carried you in her belly, talked to you, sang to you, and loved you more than anything in the world." "Did Mommy Eleanor die?" asked Lily, always the most sensitive. Richard nodded, his eyes welling up. She passed away the day you were born. It was very hard because she wanted so badly to meet you, but sometimes life doesn't happen the way we plan. She gave her life so that you could live." "That's sad," said Hannah. "It is very sad," Emily agreed, taking over. "And after she passed, you were tiny little babies who needed care. Your father was very sad and alone. That's when I came to help take care of you." "And you stayed," Sophie completed. "Like the current mommy." "Exactly," Emily said with a sad smile. "I'm not the mommy who grew you in her belly, but I am the mommy who saw you take your first steps, heard your first words, wiped your tears, and celebrated every achievement. I'm the mommy who is here every day." Bella, always the most emotionally wise, came closer and placed her small hand on Emily's belly. "But Gabriel and Alice grew in your belly, so for them, you're both things." "That's true," Emily admitted. "Gabriel and Alice were born from me, but that doesn't mean I love you five any less. A mother's love isn't about bellies, it's about hearts, and my heart has infinite space for all of you." Eleanor, the oldest by minutes and always the most serious, thought for a moment before speaking. "So we're lucky. We have a mommy in heaven watching over us from there, and a mommy here taking care of us every day. That's two mommies loving us." Richard and Emily looked at each other, both with tears in their eyes. This was exactly the perspective they had hoped the girls would have, but hearing it come from them was different. "Exactly that, my love," Richard said, pulling Eleanor into a hug. "You are very, very lucky, and lucky to have each other too. 5 sisters who will be together forever." "And a brother," added Gabriel, in his small child's voice, not wanting to be forgotten. "And soon a little sister," Hannah completed excitedly. In the following days, the conversation continued naturally. The girls asked more questions about Eleanor, about what she was like, what she liked. Richard showed photos, told stories, making sure they knew their biological mother. Emily not only supported but encouraged it, knowing it was important for the girls to understand their full story. A week later, Mrs. Teresa came for dinner. She arrived with gifts for everyone, as she always did, but this time she brought something special. It was a carved wooden box containing Eleanor's jewelry. "These were my daughter-in-law's," Mrs. Teresa explained, placing the box on the table. "They are 5 delicate necklaces, each with a different stone. Eleanor bought them when she found out she was expecting quintuplets, one for each daughter. She planned to give them to you when you were older, but she didn't get the chance." She opened the box, revealing 5 delicate white gold chains, each with a small pendant, one with a sapphire, one with a ruby, one with an emerald, one with a topaz, and one with an amethyst. The 5 girls looked on, fascinated. "They're beautiful," Lily whispered, touching one delicately. "Your mother, Eleanor, chose each stone thinking of each of you," Mrs. Teresa continued. "Of course, she didn't know your personalities yet, but she had dreams and hopes. She wanted you to grow up strong, beautiful inside and out, and to always remember that you were so loved, even before you were born." The 5 received their necklaces with reverence. Emily helped put them on and Richard took pictures. It was a significant moment, a tangible connection to the mother they never knew. "Thank you, Grandma," said Eleanor, holding her necklace with the blue sapphire. "I'll keep it forever." That night, after putting everyone to sleep, Richard found Emily crying in their room. He approached, concerned. "What's wrong? Are you in pain? Is it Alice?" Emily shook her head. "It's not the baby. It's just that today, seeing the girls receive Eleanor's necklaces, I realized again that I'll never be their first mother. I'll always be the second, the one who came after." Richard sat beside her, pulling her close. "Emily, look at me. You are not the second mother. You are the mother who is here. The mother they know, whom they love, whom they seek when they are scared or sad or happy. Eleanor gave them birth, but you gave them a life. Both things are important, but they don't compete with each other. I just don't want them to think I'm trying to replace her." "They don't think that," Richard assured her. "You heard Eleanor today. She said they're lucky to have 2 mothers. That's only possible because you have always honored Eleanor's memory, always made sure they knew about her. You're not competing with her. You're completing her love." Emily wiped her tears, placing a hand on her belly where Alice was moving. "Do you think I'm being silly?" "I think you're being human." Richard kissed her forehead. "And I think you are the best mother those 5 could have ever had. Eleanor unknowingly chose well." 3 weeks later, Alice was born. It was an even quicker delivery than Gabriel's, just 4 hours from start to finish. When Emily held her daughter for the first time, she felt a completeness she didn't know was missing. She had 7 children now, 5 from her heart, 2 from her womb. And she loved them all with equal intensity, but in unique ways. The Quintuplets met Alice in the hospital. They all wanted to hold her, all wanted to be first. Richard had to organize a line, each holding her for a few minutes under supervision. Gabriel was jealous at first, but when Alice grabbed his finger with her tiny hand, he melted. "My sister," he declared with pride. "Our sister," corrected Eleanor. "We're all siblings." Coming home was chaotic. 7 children was definitely more challenging than 6, but the family had an established dynamic, routines that worked, and enough love to embrace one more. One night, 2 months after Alice's birth, Mrs. Teresa asked to speak with Richard and Emily privately. They met in the library. After all the children were asleep. "I want to apologize again," Mrs. Teresa began, her voice emotional. "Not just for my actions in the past, but for all the moments since then when I judged, when I doubted, when I tried to control. You have built something extraordinary here, something I almost destroyed out of pride and fear." "Mrs. Teresa, we're past that," Emily said softly. "I know, but I need to say it." The older woman wiped her tears. "Seeing you with these 7 children, seeing the genuine happiness in this house, makes me realize how wrong I was. About everything. About what constitutes a family. About what love is, about what truly matters. Emily, you are the best thing that could have happened to my son and my granddaughters. And I beg your forgiveness for not seeing it from the beginning." Emily stood up and hugged her mother-in-law. "You're here now," she said. "You're part of the family, part of the children's lives. That's what matters." Richard watched the 2 women embrace and felt immense gratitude. His family was unconventional, built in unexpected ways, but it was real and strong. He had 5 daughters who shared the womb, of a woman who had passed too soon. He had a son and a daughter who came from the woman he now loved. He had a mother who had learned to let go of control and accept the unexpected, and above all, he had Emily, the woman who had arrived broken and helped fix an entire family in the process, the woman who had turned pain into love, loss into gain, tragedy into redemption, the woman who proved that a mother is not who gives birth, but who raises, who loves, who is present every day, choosing love over convenience. 5 years had passed since that conversation on the porch about the 2 mothers. The Greenwich house had transformed into a veritable hub of constant activity. The Quintuplets were now 10 and a half in the 5th grade, each flourishing in their own directions, but maintaining the unbreakable bond that only multiples share. Eleanor was the scholar, always with a book in her hand, asking complex questions about the universe, life, the meaning of things. She wanted to be a scientist or a writer, she hadn't decided yet, but she knew it would be something that involved discovering and explaining things. Hannah maintained her fascination with animals, had a fish tank, 2 hamsters, and constantly begged for a dog. She dreamed of being a veterinarian. Lily remained passionate about music, taking violin lessons 3 times a week and playing with a sensitivity that made people cry. Sophie was the family athlete, playing on the school soccer team, running, swimming, never stopping. Bella had developed her artistic talent. Her paintings had already been exhibited in a local children's gallery. Gabriel, at 8, was the classic middle child, always trying to get attention in a house full of sisters. He was charismatic, funny, and had a natural ability to make people laugh. He loved to build things, spending hours with building blocks creating complex structures. Alice, at 5, was the temporary baby of the family, spoiled by everyone but especially by the Quintuplets who treated her like a living doll. Richard and Emily, now in their early 40s, had developed a solid partnership and a deep love that had grown gradually over the years. It wasn't the stormy, passionate love of the beginning, but something calmer, deeper, more resilient. They knew each other completely, flaws and qualities, and they chose love every day. Richard's construction company was thriving, but he had learned to balance work and family. He never missed one of Lily's music recitals, one of Sophie's games, or one of Bella's art shows. He made a point of being present for all 7 of his children, each receiving regular individual attention. Emily had become more than a mother. She volunteered at institutions that helped women who had lost babies, sharing her story, offering hope. She also gave talks about unconventional families, about adoption of the heart, about love that transcends biology. Her story with the Quintuplets had become well known, inspiring others. It was on a Saturday morning that something special happened. The family was gathered for breakfast, all 9 at the large table Richard had custom-made years ago, specifically to accommodate everyone. It was organized chaos, overlapping conversations, laughter, small arguments about who ate the last biscuit. "Mum," Eleanor said suddenly, silencing everyone. She only commanded attention when she had something important to say. "The teacher asked us to write an essay about our families. I wrote about having 2 mums and she said it was confusing, that I should choose one." Emily felt her stomach clench. "What did you say?" Eleanor looked at her with those serious eyes she'd always had. "I said it's not confusing, it's special. I have Mommy Eleanor, who gave me life but is in heaven, and I have you who gave me everything else. Both are important. Why choose?" Hannah agreed. "It's like having 2 houses. You don't have to choose which house is the real one. Both are real. And you're here every day," added Lily. "You make lunch, help with homework, come to our performances. That's being a mom too." Sophie, always direct, said what they were all thinking. "Mommy Eleanor was important, but you're the mum we know. You're the one we count on." Bella, the most emotional, stood up and hugged Emily. "You're our mommy. Mommy Eleanor is our heaven mommy. Both fit in our hearts." Emily couldn't hold back the tears. She looked at Richard, who was also emotional. Gabriel and Alice watched, confused, being too young to fully understand the complexity of the situation. "Thank you, girls," Emily managed to say. "You don't know how much it means to hear that. I was always afraid I wouldn't be enough, that you'd grow up and realize I'm not the real." "Mom, but you are real," Eleanor protested. "The most real possible. You're here every day in everything. How can you not be real?" Richard cleared his throat, too emotional to speak clearly. "Your mommy Emily has always honored the memory of Mommy Eleanor. She always made sure you knew her story, saw her pictures, knew you were loved before you were even born. That shows the size of her heart." "It's true," Hannah agreed. "At school, when they talk about a biological mom, I talk about Mommy Eleanor. When they talk about the mom who takes care of you, I talk about you. They're 2 different things, but equally important." That conversation changed something fundamental in Emily. For years, she had carried the fear of not being enough, of always being second, the substitute. But hearing from her own daughters, now old enough to understand and articulate their feelings, that she was loved and valued as a legitimate mother, healed something deep inside her. That night, after putting everyone to sleep, Richard found Emily on the porch, the place they always went for important conversations. He sat beside her, taking her hand. "Are you okay?" "I'm more than okay," Emily replied with a genuine smile. "Today the girls gave me a gift they don't even know they gave. They freed me from a fear I've carried for years." "The fear of not being mother enough?" Emily nodded. "I always thought I'd be the eternal second choice, you know. The one who came because the first one couldn't be there. But today I realized I'm not a second choice. I'm their active choice. They choose me as their mother every day, not because they have to, but because they want to." "You were always their choice," Richard said softly. "From the day you arrived and they stopped crying for the first time in a week. They chose you before they could even speak, and they keep choosing you." Emily rested her head on his shoulder. "You know what's funny? I spent so much time afraid of not being enough for the Quintuplets that I forgot that for Gabriel and Alice, I'm the only mother they know. And they've never questioned, never doubted. They just love me." "Because you are lovable," Richard said, turning her face to kiss her. You are the strongest, most dedicated, most loving woman I know, and I love you not in spite of the complications, but because of how you navigated all of them with grace and love." "I love you too," Emily replied. "Thank you for believing in me when I doubted myself. Thank you for proposing that crazy marriage all those years ago." "Best decision of my life," Richard said with conviction. "Well, second best. The first was not giving up on finding a nanny when the first 6 quit." They laughed together, a comfortable sound of complicity built over years. Life hadn't been easy, but it had been good. 7 children were a lot of work, chaotic days, exhausting nights. But they were also 7 reasons to smile, 7 sources of unconditional love, 7 daily reminders that it had been worth not giving up. The following month, the Quintuplets school did a project on diverse families. The 5 presented together. Telling their story to the class, they talked about their biological mother who gave them birth but passed away, about the father who was left alone with 5 babies, about the nanny who came and became a mother. They showed pictures of Eleanor pregnant, pictures of Richard and Emily's wedding, pictures of the whole family together. The teacher, who had initially said it was confusing, apologized publicly. She admitted she had judged without understanding, that she now saw how their family structure was not only valid, but beautiful. Several children in the class shared their own stories of unconventional families. Adoptive parents, grandparents raising grandchildren, uncles taking on a fatherly role. Emily and Richard were invited to give a talk at the school about modern families. They spoke about love that transcends biology, about commitment that goes beyond convenience, about how family is built every day through choices and dedication. A mother in the audience raised her hand. "How do you deal with the constant presence of the first wife? Isn't it hard to compete with a memory?" Emily answered honestly. "In the beginning, yes. I was very afraid of not being enough, of always being compared and coming in second. But I learned that we're not competing. Eleanor gave the girls life. I'm giving them their childhood, their adolescence, their upbringing. They are different but complementary roles, and the girls have room in their hearts for both." Richard added, "Honoring Eleanor's memory doesn't diminish the love we have for Emily. In fact, the fact that Emily makes sure the girls know their biological mother shows the size of her heart. Many people in her place would try to erase the past. She embraced it." After the talk, several people came to speak with them. Women who had lost babies and found hope in Emily's story. Adoptive parents who felt validated. Step-parents who struggled to find their place. Their story was touching people, giving hope, showing that love can flourish in the most unlikely circumstances. Back at home, the Quintuplets chatted excitedly in the back of the family van. "It was cool to see pictures of Mommy Eleanor at school," commented Hannah. "She was very pretty." "It seems like she was nice too," said Sophie. "From the way Dad talks about her, you can tell she was special." Eleanor, always the most thoughtful, said something that silenced them all. "I think Mommy Eleanor would be happy to know that Mommy Emily takes care of us. If she loved us as much as Dad says, she would want us to have a good mom." And we do. From the driver's seat, Richard and Emily looked at each other. Their eyes were misty, but they were tears of gratitude and happiness. The girls had come to a deep and mature understanding of their situation on their own. There was no resentment, no confusion. There was acceptance and love. "I think so," Lily agreed. "I think both mums are happy. One up there taking care of us spiritually, another down here taking care of us physically. It's like having a full team," joked Gabriel from the middle of the van. "2 mums are better than 1. Everyone laughed, the tension of the serious moment dissolving. Alice, who had been dozing in her car seat, woke up and started to fuss. Immediately, the 5 quintuplets turned to calm her, each offering a toy, making funny faces, singing. It was a choreography they did without thinking, the instinct to care for their younger sister deeply ingrained. Emily watched in the rearview mirror and felt her heart expand. These 5 girls who came into her life crying desperately had transformed into strong, compassionate and loving individuals, and she had had the privilege of being part of that transformation, of being chosen by them as a mother, not out of obligation but out of genuine love. Richard took her hand, over the gear shift, squeezing it gently. He looked at her and whispered just loud enough for her to hear, Thank you for saving my family, for saving me, for turning our tragedy into something beautiful." Emily squeezed back. "Thank you for letting me be a part of it, for giving me a family when I thought I would never have one, for proving that love builds bridges over any abyss." And as they drove back to the Greenwich mansion, with 7 voices talking, laughing, occasionally arguing in the back, the two of them knew they had built something extraordinary, family that challenged conventions, that proved love was stronger than biology, that showed that from the ashes of loss and pain, something not only beautiful but transcendent could arise. 10 years after that first night of despair, when 5 babies cried non-stop, the Greenwich mansion was celebrating an important milestone. It was the Quintuplets' 15th birthday, and the entire family was gathered to celebrate. The house had changed over the years. The nursery was now a study. The girls' rooms had been redecorated to reflect their unique personalities. Eleanor had a personal library, Hannah a huge fish tank and posters of wild animals, Lily a corner with her violin and sheet music, Sophie trophies from sports competitions, Bella a makeshift studio filled with paints and canvases. Gabriel, at 13, was in his early teens, his voice changing, growing fast. Alice, at 10, was no longer the baby of the family. She was a smart, articulate girl who loved to write stories. Richard and Emily, now in their late 40s, had a few grey hairs, but were happy in a deep and quiet way. The party was simple but joyful. A few of the Quintuplets' friends, close relatives, Mrs. Gable, who still worked in the house despite her advanced age, and Mrs. Teresa, who at 77 was still vibrant and present in her grandchildren's lives. In the middle of the party, Eleanor asked for attention. The conversation ceased, everyone looking at the oldest quintuplet who had grown into a beautiful, serious and eloquent young woman. She held a paper in her hand, visibly nervous. "I wrote something," she began in a clear voice. "Something I want to read to everyone, especially to Mom, Emily and Dad." Emily felt her heart race. Richard took her hand, squeezing it gently. The other 4 quintuplets joined Eleanor, forming a line, and she began to read. 15 years ago, 5 babies came into the world amidst a tragedy. Our biological mother, Eleanor, gave us life but couldn't stay to watch us grow. Our father was left alone with 5 babies who cried non-stop, desperate and not knowing what to do. And then a young woman arrived, broken by her own loss, who somehow calmed us when no one else could. Eleanor paused, wiping away tears that had begun to fall. We grew up hearing stories of 2 extraordinary women, Mommy Eleanor, who carried us, loved us before we even breathed, and who sacrificed everything so we could live, and Mommy Emily, who took us in at our most vulnerable moment and chose to stay, chose to love, chose to be a mother even when no one expected it of her. Hannah continued, taking the paper. For years, people asked us if it was confusing to have 2 mothers, if we didn't miss having a real mum, but we always knew the truth. We have 2 real mothers, one who lives in our memories through stories and photos, who gave us the gift of life, and another who is here every day, who saw our first steps, heard our first words, wiped our tears, celebrated our victories. Lily took her turn, her musical voice trembling with emotion. "Mommy Emily, you never tried to replace Mommy Eleanor. You always made sure we knew about her, that we honored her memory. That shows the greatness of your heart. You weren't jealous of a woman who is no longer here. You included her in our lives, ensured she was part of our story." Sophie, always direct and strong, said with a firm voice, "And you did all of this while taking care of the 5 of us plus 2 of your own children. You never made us feel less loved because we weren't born from you. You never treated us differently from Gabriel and Alice. You gave us unconditional and equal love to all 7. Bella finished, tears streaming freely. "So today, on our 15th birthday, we want to say it officially. Mommy Emily, you are our mother, not less than Mommy Eleanor, not in second place, but equally important in a different way. Thank you for choosing us. Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving us in such a pure and genuine way. We are who we are because you were here every day, shaping us with love." Emily couldn't stop crying. She stood up, and the 5 surrounded her in a collective hug, all crying together. Richard joined them, and then Gabriel and Alice too. It was a complete family hug, 7 children and 2 parents, all connected by a love that transcended biology. When they finally separated, Emily managed to speak. "Thank you, girls. You don't know how much this means. Taking care of you saved my life when I thought I had no more reason to live. You gave me purpose, joy, a family. I should be thanking you for letting me be your mother." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "We thank you. You had a choice. You could have left when Grandma Teresa tried to fire you, but you chose to come back, chose to fight for us, chose to love even when it was hard. That is true motherhood, a daily choice of love." Mrs. Teresa approached, also emotional. "Emily, my dear, I must ask for forgiveness one more time. I almost destroyed this family out of pride and prejudice. If I had succeeded in driving you away all those years ago, these girls would not have the wonderful mother they have. Thank you for forgiving my ignorance and for proving that family is built with love, not with society's rules." Mrs. Gable, always present but discreet, also spoke. "I saw everything from the beginning. I saw the despair when the girls wouldn't stop crying. I saw the transformation when Miss Emily arrived. And over the years, I saw a family form, grow and thrive based on genuine love. It is the most beautiful story I have ever witnessed in my life." The party continued in an emotional but happy atmosphere. Later, when the guests had left and the children were in their rooms, Richard and Emily met on the porch, the place they always went for important conversations. "Who would have thought?" Richard said, looking at the stars. 15 years ago you were a desperate nanny I fired out of fear and ignorance. And today you are my wife, the mother of my 7 children, the woman I love more than anything." Emily rested her head on his shoulder. "And who would have thought that I, a woman broken by the loss of a son, would find not 1 but 7 children in such unlikely circumstances? Life has mysterious ways of healing our wounds." "You know what impresses me the most?" Richard asked. "How those 5 tiny babies who wouldn't stop crying transformed into strong, compassionate and articulate young women. They have so much of you, Emily, your strength, your empathy, your wisdom." "And they have some of you too," Emily retorted. "Your determination, your sense of responsibility, your capacity to love deeply." They were silent for a moment, just enjoying each other's presence. Then Emily said something that had been on her heart for a long time. "Richard, do you think Eleanor would approve? Approve of what we've built here?" Richard thought carefully before answering. "I knew Eleanor for 5 years. She was generous, always thinking of others' well-being above her own. Her greatest dream was for the girls to be happy and loved. So yes, I think she would not only approve, but she would be grateful. Grateful that her daughters had you, that they never grew up without a mother's love, that they had a childhood full of joy despite starting with tragedy." "I hope so," Emily whispered. "I hope she knows that I loved her daughters as if they were my own, that I tried to be half the mother she would have been." "You were exactly the mother they needed," Richard said with conviction. "Eleanor would have loved them in one way, you loved them in another. Both ways are valid, necessary, complementary. Together the two of you gave them what they needed to become who they are." The next morning, Sunday, the family did what they always did on the first Sunday of each month. They visited Eleanor's grave. The Quintuplets brought fresh flowers, each placing a white rose on the site. It was a ritual Emily had established years ago, ensuring Eleanor was never forgotten, that the girls maintained a connection with their biological mother. "Hi, Mommy Eleanor," Hannah said, as she always did. "It's us again. We're doing well, growing up, studying, thank you for life." Each of the other 4 also spoke, small updates on their lives, recent achievements, words of thanks. Then Eleanor, always the most eloquent, spoke for them all. "Mommy Eleanor, today we turn 15. 15 years since you gave us life and passed on. We want you to know that we've grown up well. We have an incredible father who loves us very much. We have a mother who takes care of us every day with infinite dedication. We have 2 younger siblings whom we adore. We have a big family full of love. And we have your memory always present in our hearts. Thank you for everything. We hope you're proud of us." Emily stood a little apart, as she always did during these visits, giving the girls space to connect with Eleanor. But this time, Eleanor called her over. "Mommy, Emily, come here." Emily approached hesitantly. Eleanor took her hand and placed it on the headstone. "Mommy Eleanor," she continued, "this is Emily. You never met her, but she knows you through the stories. And we want you to know that we love her as much as we love you. In different ways, but just as deeply. Thank you for leaving space in heaven so that she could occupy space on earth." Emily cried silently. The other four placed their hands over hers, all touching the headstone together. It was a moment of connection between two mothers who had never met but who together had given everything. To 5 extraordinary girls. Back at home, Emily reflected on the journey, 15 years of highs and lows, of challenges and victories, of tears and laughter. There were days that were exhausting when she would collapse into bed with no strength left. There were moments of doubt, of insecurity, of fear of not being enough, but there were also moments of pure joy. First steps, first words, school performances, deep conversations, tight hugs, spontaneous declarations of love. It was worth every tear, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt, because in the end, she had 7 children who loved her, a husband who respected and loved her, a family that had completely embraced her. She had purpose, she had joy, she had the life she never imagined possible after losing Leo. And Leo. Emily still thought of him, but the pain had transformed. It was no longer the open wound that constantly bled. It was a scar that hurt sometimes, but also reminded her that she had survived, that she had found the strength to continue, that she had turned tragedy into redemption. She believed, deep in her heart, that Leo would be proud of how she took the pain of losing him and turned it into love for other children, proud of how she honored his memory by caring for those in need, proud of how she built a beautiful life on the ruins of a devastating loss. That night, after everyone was asleep, Richard found Emily writing in a journal she had kept for years. "What are you writing?" he asked curiously. "A letter," she replied, "for the girls to read when they're older, telling the whole story, how it really happened, with all the details, fears, doubts. I want them to know that true love isn't easy or simple. It's a choice, it's dedication, it's waking up every day and choosing it again. Can I read it?" Emily passed him the journal. Richard read in silence, tears streaming down his face as he absorbed his wife's words. When he finished, he pulled her into a tight hug. "Thank you for writing our story, for documenting everything so they never forget how it started, how we fought, how we won." "Our story," Emily repeated. "It's not perfect, it's not conventional, but it's ours, and I wouldn't trade it for anything." They held each other for a long time. 2 survivors of tragedies who had found each other, who had built an extraordinary family, who had proven that love transcends conventions, biology, social expectations. They had proven that family is a daily choice, that a mother is who raises, not necessarily who gives birth. That genuine love can heal even the deepest wounds. And as the Greenwich mansion slept, with 7 children in their rooms, a house full of life and love, Richard and Emily knew, with absolute certainty, that they were exactly where they were supposed to be, together, with the family they chose, and that chose them back. The 5 quintuplets who couldn't sleep had found not only sleep but security, love, and purpose. The nanny who had arrived broken had transformed into a mother, a wife, and a fulfilled woman. The desperate father had found a partner, a companion, and love again. And together the 3 of them, Eleanor included through memory and legacy, had created something that transcended tragedy. They had created hope, joy, and living proof that love always finds a way. End of story.